Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching second and final part of What If Naruto Was Banished and Tsunade Left With Him. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
Arm in arm, Naruto and Hinata strode down the well-lit street, both of them blushing slightly as they went silently, neither of them at all at ease with their current circumstances. The moon's full, Hinata-chan. Naruto grinned as he said, looking up at the sky as they walked. Hinata grinned and turned her pale lavender eyes to the luminous orb in the sky, saying, it's beautiful, na Naruto-kun. Yeah, said Naruto, then recalling a scene from a movie, he added, but you're prettier. The former Hyuga heiress's cheeks darkened at the unexpected compliment, and she had to force herself not to pass out as she questioned, really? Of course. Naruto exclaimed with a dazzling smile that, in Hinata's opinion, was so bright it eclipsed the celestial body in the sky above with a gentle smile of her own. Hinata stepped closer to the blonde and tightened her grip on his arm. The young couple was aware that someone was observing them as they walked because they could feel the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. However, neither mentioned it to avoid spoiling the moment, blaming it on Sakura, Sume, Shizune, or Tsunade observing them. Probably taking pointers from me, Naruto reflected proudly. Nevertheless, neither was aware that Danzo and Heishi had ordered their assassination. With her mask on and a thin bamboo blowgun with metal lining on the inside in her hand, Hyena stood in the shadows of a rooftop. She took a deep breath, aimed at Naruto's neck, pushed her mask up, and brought the blowgun to her lips as she watched the two strolling down the street. Her eyes widened, though, and she let out a deep breath in a silent gasp before dropping the blowgun, which rolled away without causing any harm. A gloved hand covered her mouth and drew her head back, exposing a thin blade that sliced deep into her neck. The cat-masked woman let the body fall to the ground, then wiped the blood from her blade on the deceased woman's shirt and put it back in its holster. After finishing that, she pulled out a scroll and sealed the body inside. She made a single hand seal, pocketed the scroll into a secret compartment, and vanished in a puff of white smoke. 2 to go, 1 down. With a frown concealed behind his mask, Lion watched the two continue their stroll before entering a tiny eatery. Hawk had either failed to hit her targets or she didn't fare at all because the two hadn't even flinched during their walk. She hadn't fired, but why not? He knew that Hawk was too good a shot to miss unwary targets walking down the street. As he narrowly avoided a hooked sword that was meant to cut off his head, he responded. He turned, pulled out his ninjutsu, and gazed into the elaborately adorned mask of a wolf, its brother in the attacker's other hand, holding the sword that had attempted to take his head. What are you doing? Wolf responded. I should be asking you that question. On whose authority is it that you're trying to murder Chun and Uzumaki Naruto? Wolf arched an eyebrow behind his mask and said, Danzo? That crippled, one-eyed son of a bitch is not now, never has been, and never will be the Hokage, whom is the only person a shinobi of Konoha should take orders from. Lion responded. Danzo-sama ordered me to execute Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Hinata. Danzo-sama is a great man. What he does is for the good of Konoha, Lion howled. And Wolf narrowed his eyes as he, for the good of what? A load of bullshit. His actions are for the good of Danzo and Danzo alone. That man doesn't give a shit about Konoha or you. Don't treat Danzo-sama disrespectfully like that, Lion roared as he charged Wolf. The two were engaged in combat from the moment they met, attacking, blocking, and dodging. Hooks ghosted across skin, seeking a grip, and a finely sharpened blade came within a hair's breadth of slicing into flesh. Not a single movement was wasted as the blades moved, and sandal-clad feet were moving too, kicking or counter-kicking as one looked to end the other. They were so skilled that if someone saw the two fighting, they would mistake it for a meticulously choreographed ballet rather than a bloody duel. Their training was so thorough and intense that even the smallest muscle movement was quickly and precisely deciphered, enabling each to avoid several blows that would have killed a weaker opponent. They were still human, though, as evidenced by the tears in their clothing and the small wounds on their bodies that showed how nearly they had ended the other. After fighting in silence for a few minutes, they finally stepped back from one another and rested in a defensive position while gasping for air. Lion's eyes darkened inside his mask as he growled, I know that Danzo-sama wishes for them to die, and that's all that matters. Wolf begged, give up this madness and return home. They don't deserve to die, and you know it. As he started flashing through hand seals, Wolf whispered, I see well, then I pray you can forgive me for what I'm about to do. With his ninjutsu ready to end the other man before he could finish his seals, Lion's eyes widened as he charged Wolf. He was a little too slow, though, as Wolf halted on the snake seal and yelled, Doden. Tsuchi no Shokushu. Lion snarled as stone and earth tendons arose from the ground. Grabbing for him and slicing through the attacking earthen arms with his ninjutsu, he glared at Wolf and leapt, intending to stab the other Anbu in the heart to break the jutsu. His arms went slack, ninjutsu clattering to the ground beneath him, and his eyes widened as blood dripped from beneath his mask. Just inches from his target, Wolf was able to exhale in relief as his body went limp, held up only by the earthen tentacle that was piercing his chest. The masked head of Lion thudded to the ground as the living Anbu operative picked up the fallen ninjutsu, lifted it above his head, and brought it down, the sharp blade effortlessly slicing through muscle and bone with a single hand seal. Wolf dropped the bloody ninjutsu to the ground and watched as the tendrils returned to the earth, dragging their headless prize deep into its crust, concealing the fact that there had ever been a second man there except for his head and blade. Wolf sighed and quickly sealed both into a scroll, then disappeared in a puff of smoke after performing another hand seal. One more to go, 2 down. As if studying the menu, Naruto sat across from Hinata at the small table, unable to look at her without blushing, a reaction that the former Hyuga clan heiress also exhibited. At last, Hinata blushed and smiled softly as she said, "Yo, you've said that say several times already." Naruto gave her a bright smile and said, "You do look pretty, Hinata-chan." "But it's true." Naruto almost screamed, and Hinata ducked her head, her blush darkening and her smile widening as she whispered, "You don't be so loud, nah, Naruto-kun." With a sheepish smile, Naruto rubbed the back of his head and said, "Sorry." When the two heard a gentle clearing of the throat, they looked up to see a short-haired woman in a white shirt and black pants standing next to their table. Although she appeared completely normal, Naruto felt uneasy because of her emotionless eyes and too phony smile, which made his own smile seem uncomfortable. The woman turned to Hinata and said, "And for the young lady?" Naruto said, "I'd like some curry rice and yakiniku with mugicha to drink." Both women blushed as Naruto said, "Hello, what can I get our young couple today?" The woman grinned as she recorded the orders and said, "Now you two relax while your order is being prepared." Hinata had said, "Anyo, I'd like some tendon and vegetable teriyaki with kukukicha to drink." Naruto turned to Hinata as the woman left and said, "Why don't you tell me about yourself?" Hinata said, "Oh, okay," and started to tell Naruto about her sensei, teammates, and the missions they had finished. She had Naruto's full attention while she spoke, even though she thought it was boring, and the pale-eyed girl relished the attention from her longtime crush. With her eerie smile, the red-haired woman went into the kitchen and approached one of the more experienced chefs, giving him the orders. The smile startled the man, so he accepted it and went to work without daring to glance at her. Damn creepy woman, he thought to himself. Even so, where did they find her? With an unwavering smile, she reached into her pocket and started tinkering with something while she waited. With his back to her, she took out a tiny vial filled with a muddy brown liquid. As he left to get some ingredients, she started to move toward the food being prepared after popping the topper, but she stopped when she heard a man say, "Hey, the boss wants to talk to you." As the man moved to the food preparation area, she stopped the vial, put it back in her pocket, and left for the boss's office. He grabbed some of the noodles with chopsticks and shoved them into his mouth, making sure the chef wasn't looking. He nodded and swallowed after a few seconds, and as the chef turned back, he stood up again. "Hey, who are you?" he asked, blinking at the young man. The man smiled and said, "Temp." The chef nodded, relieved that the woman was gone, but also relieved that he appeared more affable despite having a thick scar that ran diagonally from his chin, across his mouth, and to the left side of his nose, as well as from the corner of his left eye to his ear. More human than the woman. When the chef said, "All right boy, could you not stand so close to the food? Health reasons, you understand?" The dark-haired man nodded and gave a sheepish smile in response, saying, "Right, sorry." The younger man nodded and said, "Yeah, I know what you mean." Eyes look dead and smile is fake. The chef shuddered and said, "I hope you don't find this rude, but that woman, she gives me the creeps. Something not right about her." "How did that monster harm you?" the young man asked, looking at the red-haired woman's departure with sadness in his eyes. "No way. You actually defeated some Iwanuke nin on a mission?" Naruto exclaimed, wide-eyed and gazing in wonder and admiration at the Hyuga heiress on the other side. Unaccustomed to having someone gaze at her with such unfiltered feelings in their eyes, the girl flushed. Hinata asked, "Hi BU, but didn't Yuan and your team to defeat a former SW swordsman of the mist?" He laughed softly and replied, "Well, I didn't do that much. It was mostly Kakashi-sensei who did all the work." Hinata forced herself not to frown at the mention of Kakashi, understanding that Naruto was unaware of what the silver-haired Junin had said about both Naruto and his apparent Ka-san. Knowing how much hearing it would hurt him, she didn't have the courage to tell him. Naruto asked, "So Hinata-chan, why do you agree to come out with me anyways?" Hinata blushed and said, "Why? B because you're key kind. Caring, and generous. Anyone who aspires to be with you would be honored to do so." When the pale-eyed girl gave a shy nod in response to Naruto's question, "Really?" the boy's eyes started to water and he smiled. The girl just jumped to number 2, just below his Kasan Tsunade, if she wasn't already high on his nakama list. When a new voice said, "Well now, isn't this sweet?" the two turned to face the dark-haired man wearing the restaurant's uniform who was carrying a platter with 2 cups of tea, which were set out in front of each customer. The man simply grinned and replied, "Oh, she had to go to a meeting with our boss, so I'll be your server from now on. My name is Miyamoto Shishiguro, and it's a pleasure to be serving both of you." Naruto had inquired, "Where's the red-haired lady?" Mirroring the smile with his own, Naruto said, "Oh okay." Something about the red-haired woman made him uneasy, as if she were merely a puppet performing the actions, and he was relieved that she was no longer serving them. Luckily, the green-eyed man who served them didn't share anything. The man bowed and left the teenagers alone once more, saying, "Well, enjoy your drinks, and I'll be back with your food in a little bit." With a sheepish smile, Naruto turned back to Hinata and inquired, "So Hinata-chan, did you really mean what you said?" The girl blushed and said, "Oh of course, na Naruto-kun, I wouldn't lie to you." Before Naruto took a sip from his cup of tea, he gave her another brilliant smile, which the midnight-haired girl across from him mirrored. In preparation for an attack, the red-haired woman stood in front of the door with one hand behind her back gripping the handle of a kunai that was tucked into her waistband. She swung the door open, pretending to smile, and saw the manager's office, with the oak desk and high-backed chair behind it, facing the window. An unknown voice said, "Yes, as a matter of fact I've been wondering what happened to you, and now I know, and I have another reason to slit the bastard Danzo's throat." The woman asked, "You wanted to see me?" "Do not disrespect Danzo-sama like that, he is a great man looking out for the good of Konoha," the red-haired woman retorted. When the voice said, "Bullshit, he took you away from your newborn son, and did only God knows what to make you into this. That was not for the good of Konoha." The chair turned and Kat was sitting there with her mask in her hands. Her short purple hair framed the wearer's dark eyes and unblemished face. Kat sighed and said, "Please don't make me do this, I don't want to have to hurt you. Please don't force me to do so, please." The red-haired woman responded, drawing the hidden kunai and keeping it ready, "I don't have a son." In response, the woman spun around and threw her kunai at Kat, causing the purple-haired Anbu to turn and fly past her face before crashing through the window behind. As the woman landed on the desk, she turned back to her assailant and jumped forward into a roll, slicing cleanly through the back of the chair with an unsealed ninjutsu. Unsheathing her own ninjutsu, Kat stood up and watched the woman intently, waiting for the redhead to launch her next attack. Her eyes were filled with sadness as they met the dead eyes of the woman who abruptly jumped backwards off the desk while flashing through one-handed seals and exhaling at the end of them. Kat dodged a hole that a compressed blast of air had just blasted into the wall behind her head. In response, she threw multiple senbon at the knee operative, who blocked them with her ninjutsu and charged Kat with a sword slash. After bringing up her own blade and blocking the slash that was intended to split her head in two, Kat spun away and launched her own slash, which she avoided by stepping back. Kat turned to face her once more and blocked as the redhead launched a barrage of blows intended to swiftly eliminate her purple-haired adversary. The two women's elder abruptly advanced with a straight punch, which Kat parried with a backhand and paid for by getting pierced in the thigh by the tip of the ninjutsu. Her sword flashed through the air in a blur as she staggered back from the redhead, who had moved in to press her advantage, hissing in pain. Kat pushed back the pain and started blocking the blows, attempting to avoid tripping every time she had to apply pressure to her injured leg. Watching as Kushina started flashing through hand seals, taking a deep breath and letting it out as a gout of flame, Kat managed to avoid another downward stroke from the redhead and fell to one knee as her injured leg failed her. She pulled another pair of senbon dripping with a clear liquid and threw them at the red-haired woman, who easily sidestepped the throw before charging Kat again. Kat jumped to the side and rolled to a crouch, narrowly escaping being roasted by the flames. 3 shuriken flew at her as she closed in, forcing her to block and halt her charge. She looked up to see the man who had asked her to return with his hands in a seal. She was frozen in a genjutsu that would only last a few moments at most before she could move. Kat drew a hypodermic needle filled with a clear liquid and jumped toward her, pushing the plunger down and forcing the needle deep into her bicep before she could break it and carry on the attack. The redhead blinked as the genjutsu broke due to the pain, and as the world became blurry and unfocused, she stumbled and fell, falling to the ground. Kat caught her and lifted her into her arms in a bridal fashion. "What was in that needle, Yugo?" Shishiguro asked, and Yugo responded, "A powerful knockout drug. It'll keep her out for a few hours. You stay her and keep an eye on Naruto and Hinata while I take her and meet up with Tsunade-sama and the rest of her team." Shishiguro nodded and said, "Alright, good luck Yugo-senpai." Yugo then left through the broken window and fled into the night while Shishiguro went to a closet nearby. He opened it, took out a balding middle-aged man, and sat him down in his chair so he lay across the desk. He set a half-drunk bottle of alcohol on the nearby desk and quickly fixed the window and chair with a basic jutsu. He nodded and left the office, leaving the man to wake up shortly with a headache, which he blamed on the alcohol, along with his nap. Sakura and Shizune were already asleep in one of their hotel rooms when Tsunade turned to face Sume. "All right, Sume, it's time for us to talk," she sighed. The blonde leaned back and said, "Well, I don't care, we're going to have a talk whether you want to or not, it needs to be done, and chances are we're not going to have such a chance in weeks to come." Sume ignored the blonde and said, "I don't want to." Sume asked, "Can't you just drop it?" Tsunade responded, "Honestly, I probably could, but I don't really want to." "Why?" Sume asked. Tsunade responded, "Because I see someone who's hurting, and has been for a very long time. Honestly, I see a mirror of my younger self. Maybe if someone had done this for me when I was younger, I'd not spent so many years slowly killing my body with alcohol and gambling myself into a debt worth several $1,000,000. Well, I'll have you know that I'm nothing like that," Sume replied with a scowl and tease raucous chuckle. "Don't try and lie to me. I know the signs. You're one small step away from falling into depression. Your kids are the only thing keeping you from doing so, and they're quickly losing their need of you. And that'll probably become the catalyst for your depression." "Shut up. That's not true," Sume growled. Tsunade responded, "Of course it is. You've never truly gotten over your husband's death, and until you do, you're going to always be on the edge of depression." The blonde nodded in response to Sume's doubtful question. "And you think Naruto can help me?" "I really do. He helped me, and I burrowed myself so deeply into depression. Nothing short of a miracle would save me, and it just so happens that miracle is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed shinobi named Naruto. Well, my problem is different. I'm in love with a 13-year-old boy." Sume snapped, and Tsunade responded, "No, you're not. You're in love with a strong young man, and you're scared to let go of Kiru, scared that if you truly allow yourself to love Naruto, that you'll forget him or dishonor what the two of you shared." Tsunade smirked as she responded, "Easy, I know, because this is another thing I experienced firsthand. There are several men who I believed I could love, but refused to because I didn't want to dishonor Dan's memory." Sume's anger vanished, and her eyes widened as she asked, "What, how?" Jokingly, Sume said, "Let me guess, one of them's Jiraiya-sama, correct?" But then she watched in disbelief as the blonde former Hokage blushed a little. Tsunade sighed as she remarked, "That perverted baka can be really charming and caring when he wants to be, when he allows himself to be who he truly is." Sume muttered, "No way. So the pervert isn't Jiraiya?" Sume inquired. Tsunade responded, "Well, it a little, but honestly he exaggerates it immensely. He is really an intelligent, caring person. He just hides himself behind that mask, scared to let people in." "Sounds familiar," Sume murmured, and Tsunade laughed. "Honestly, most of the older and more powerful shinobi do hide themselves behind vices or a mask. One made due to paranoia and fear crafted from years of life or death battles and deceptions. In fact, the only people who don't do so are the current Raikage and his little brother, a Junin named Kiribi. Of course, both of them are a little off, mentally." Tsunade said, "But we're getting off track, Sume." Sume swore softly, and the sexy blonde laughed as she added, "I wasn't made Hokage because of my good looks." Yugo's appearance in the center of the room, her captive still in her arms, cut off their conversation. Sume stared in disbelief at the figure in her arms as both women jumped into a fighting stance as soon as she appeared, at least until they realized she was Anbu. "What are you doing here?" Tsunade inquired with skepticism. "I and my partner are here on a mission for the Hokage." "Tsunade-sama, we are here to protect Hyuga Hinata and Uzumaki Naruto from an assassination plot by Hyuga Heishi and Danzo, and will remain with you to help protect both from any future attempts." Tsunade turned as Sume abruptly lunged toward Yugo, focusing on the red-haired woman in the Anbu's arms, and said, "I see." Sume held the woman's head and turned. Its silver face was in full view. She recognized him easily, even though he was older and more worn down from battle. As if she had seen a ghost, Sume said, "It's Kushina. I thought she was dead." In response to Tsunade's question, "What is it?" Sume nodded as she clarified, "Uzumaki Kushina." Tsunade asked, hazily recalling the name, "Kushina?" Sume nodded again as she said, "Yeah, she's Naruto's mother. I remember her being so ecstatic when she found out she was pregnant but I thought she died during the Kyuubi attack." "Everyone did." Tsunade muttered, "You Uzumaki, as in?" with disbelief in her eyes. Tsunade's eyes hardened as she asked, "So she tried to murder her own son by order of Danzo?" Yugo responded, "Even Anbu believed her to be dead, until me and Shishiguro found her in the restaurant your charges are having their date in, trying to poison their food." Tsunade asked, "How so?" And Yugo replied, "It's a bit more complicated than that." Yugo responded, "Well, I tried reasoning with her, but she had no idea who I was, nor that she even had a son. All she knew was obeying Danzo. Like her entire life before the Kyuubi attack didn't exist." Tsunade then gestured to the bed and gave the clear, succinct order. "Place her on the bed and strip her. Remove any weapons you find. Sume, you help." Tsunade responded, "I'm going to do a thorough exam on her, see exactly what that one-eyed monster's done to her." Sume asked, "What are you going to do?" Sume nodded and followed Yugo to the bed, where they effortlessly undressed the unconscious redhead. Tsunade, however, stepped forward to examine herself as they gasped in surprise as they finished taking off her clothing. Her eyes widened in shock at what they did, and she muttered, "My God." In sharp contrast to his typical, shovel it all in, eating style, Naruto ate slowly and quietly. Having witnessed him use this specific dining style a few times, Hinata thought the shift in his manners was pleasant. She was aware that Sakura had most likely given him coaching on it, but it warmed her to see him apply those lessons. When he asked, "Am I really that interesting to watch eating?" Naruto looked up and grinned. "And no, it's just that well I've never seen you eat so formally before," Hinata responded, and Naruto's smile widened. "Yeah, Sakura kept going on and on about it, so I decided it must be important and I wouldn't want your reputation to become bad because of me eating wrong. However, I do that." The blonde nodded in response to Hinata's question. Really? Yeah, a nice girl like you doesn't deserve to have her reputation ruined because of me?" Hinata's cheeks darkened at his thoughtfulness and the fact that he called her nice. Thank you. That's really considerate of you." Naruto grinned and returned to her meal, and the two ate together in friendly silence. "How is everything? Do you need anything?" Shishiguro asked, smiling as he approached the table and looked between them while they were eating. Naruto observed Hinata's gentle head shake before turning to face the man and responding, "No, we're both good, thanks for asking." Shishiguro bowed and turned to leave, saying, "Not a problem, I'm here to serve. I'll be back in a bit to see if you need anything." Hinata nodded in agreement, responding, "You're nice too." Naruto grinned and said, "I like him, he's nice." Hinata mirrored Naruto's bright smile with a gentle one of her own, her cheeks darkening once more as he said, "Really? Thanks." With a sigh, Tsunade wrapped a blanket around Kushina's unconscious body and massaged her forehead. She counted the various healed injuries her patient had received from Danzo and his route, looking at the notepad that contained a sketch of Kushina drawn by Yugo in both front and rear view. Multiple scars on her back, chest, stomach, and thighs, many of them having clear indications of being caused by whipping. There's also evidence that several of her ribs, both wrists and right ankle, have been broken and mended, though the wrists and ankle were suffered during intense sparring. A trademark of Danzu's. The ribs, however, seemed to indicate that she was beaten while restrained, possibly as a way to break her mentally. Tsunade mumbled more to herself than to Yugo were speaking. Tsunade continued, turning to the next page, which was filled with notes, and scrawling a few more before going back to the page with the sketches. "But what's really disturbing are the seals I found on her tongue, the small of her back, and the base of her neck, as well on her stomach. I don't know their functions, but I'm certain I can get Jiraiya here to check them out. I'll also need to send for Inoichi to see exactly how bad the mental scarring is." Tsunade put the notebook down and rubbed her forehead once more, growling as veins appeared to protrude from it. "What's the matter, Tsunade?" Sume inquired, and the Sannin responded, "I'm finding more and more reasons to hate Sensei by the day. Today's reason is that he didn't have that son of a bitch Danzo dragged into the center of Konoha and slowly executed before the villagers and used as an example of what happens when you try even half the shit Sensei allowed him to get away with. Maybe Sarutobi-sama didn't know." Yugo made a suggestion, and Tsunade growled, "Oh, he knew, all right. He may not have known everything that bastard was doing, but he knew enough to have the man executed. Sensei was getting too soft in his old age, allowing Orochimaru escape after finding that bastard in his perverse den, filled with experiments and people being tortured. But he allowed the bastard to life, which even now allows him to haunt and torment us." Tsunade took a deep breath and let it out as she resisted the urge to learn Orochimaru's twisted resurrection jutsu, use it to bring back Sarutobi, and then kill him again. "Tsunade, calm down. All we can do now is give this information to Jiraiya and hope that he does what Sarutobi-sama didn't, use it to execute that one-eyed prick." Leaning back with her eyes closed, Tsunade stated, This is why I left Konoha in the first place. I got sick of all this bullshit, and just wanted to live the rest of my life drinking and gambling, leaving a sake-soaked corpse and $1 trillion debt for Konoha to pay off when I died, but one little blonde brat named Uzumaki Naruto screwed up my life and pulled me back into the fold. And you know what the worst part is? She added with a regretful smile. No, tell us, Yugo asked, and Tsunade replied, the worst part is that if I could, I would go back in time and return to Konoha FST sooner, just so that very same blonde brat wouldn't have to grow up all alone like he did, which is just another mark against sensei. So, what do we with Kushina? Sume inquired, and Tsunade responded, we simply keep her drugged and comfortable until Jiraiya and Inoichi come and see exactly what Danzu's done to her. The former Hokage shook her head and responded, no, we wait until Naruto gets back and have him send a toad to that old pervert. Yugo asked, should I return to Konoha and tell him? The woman simply smiled at the former Inuzuka head and said, of course not, that boy doesn't need to know about Kushina yet, I'll merely tell him I require a messenger toad to deliver a message to Jiraiya about how awesome he's becoming, and Naruto won't be able to summon one fast enough. Sume wondered, you're going to tell him about her? With a sigh, Tsunade added, and what are we going to do when we have to tell him? That won't be easy, best we can do is tell him as gently as we possibly can and pray for the best. Maybe we should plan more, Yugo replied, and Tsunade chuckled, with Naruto, all plans should be considered guidelines, anything more specific, and you'll quickly find out that all you're doing is making yourself an easier target for Murphy's Law. Sume remarked, well, at least being around him isn't boring. Tsunade laughed out loud, responding, that's too true. Leaning back in his chair, Naruto put down his chopsticks and gave his stomach a satisfied pat, observing his head tilt back with his eyes closed. Hinata grinned. Naruto looked at his dark-haired dinner companion and said, man, that was good, wasn't it, Hinata-chan? She nodded in agreement and muttered, it was very delicious. With a bow and the check behind his back, Shishiguro said, well, Chef-san will be most pleased you both enjoyed it so much. He then got up, he grinned as he inspected the two and added, and don't worry about the check, it'll be on us. With a nod, the waiter responded, of course you both are very lucky, we normally don't do this, but you managed to come at a very good time, you both won a free dinner, courtesy of us. Naruto, what? Really? He brought up a camera and took a quick picture before the two could react. Hinata scowled and said, I didn't hear about a contest. The man responded, of course not. That way, we can surprise you when you win and get a picture of your reaction. The two rubbed their eyes and blinked in surprise. They noticed the waiter was gone once their vision cleared. Naruto shrugged and remarked, I suppose we ought to start. Despite her suspicions, Hinata nodded and said, hi. Naruto and Hinata hurried out of the restaurant, standing together. With a sigh, Shishiguro stood on the ceiling by the bathroom and hurriedly took off the suit, letting it drop to the floor to reveal a black spandex catsuit. He took his wolf mask off a seal on his forearm, put it on, and fell to the ground, collecting the now useless suit and putting it in a trash can. He moaned in frustration as he looked at the check, then knelt down and took out a wallet that was strapped to his leg close to his ankle. He snapped it shut after opening it, counting out the necessary ryo, and placing it in the checkbook. Shishiguro thought, I'm putting this on my expense report, even though they would never see the customers. The Matride would be startled to see a checkbook with the money in it resting on the podium as they left the building. The discovery of a waiter's uniform in a trash can close to the restrooms would only cause more confusion. Did Kiba really do that? Naruto asked, laughing into Hinata's hand as they walked arm in arm toward his hotel room. The former Hyuga heiress nodded in agreement. As she leaned against the wall outside the door, Tsunade grinned and remarked, well, looks like someone had a good time. Naruto exclaimed, yeah, before turning to face his date and apprehensively asking, you did have fun, right, Hinata-chan? The dark-haired Hyuga nodded. Blushing slightly and grinning softly with a smile, Naruto told her, I'm glad. Tsunade said, well, Naruto, I need you to summon a messenger toad. The blonde blinked and inquired, why? Naruto reluctantly took his arm away from Hinata's and nodded as Tsunade explained, because I've got some reports to send to Jiraiya, and the slugs aren't fast. He knelt on the ground, nipped at his thumb, and started pressing it against the floor while flashing through hand seals. A tiny, dark red and orange toad wearing a blue vest emerged in a puff of smoke. Gamakichi exclaimed, hey Naruto Nisan, before he saw Hinata and exclaimed, nice looking girl, Nisan. You hit the jackpot. The little frog scowled and said, sorry Naruto Nisan, all I was trying to say is that she's pretty. Hinata blushed at the toad's compliment and how swiftly the blonde defended her. Gamakichi. Don't talk to Hinata-chan like that. She deserves to be talked to with respect, Naruto growled. The little toad turned to face Tsunade, blinking his yellow eyes before he said, are you talking to me, magic boob monster? Tsunade responded, alright you two, enough squabbling, I have work for you Gamakichi-san. After exchanging glances, Naruto and Hinata swiftly retreated as Tsunade's slender hand leapt down and seized the toad hard. Gulping, the little toad nodded as he said, anything you want ma'am, she snarled, lifting him to her face, you better be glad I have a job for you, or else I'd squash you here and now. Tsunade grinned and said, good toad. She held out an envelope and said, all right, Gamakichi-san, I want you to get this letter to Jiraiya as soon as you can do a good job, and I won't use my heel to spear you the next time Naruto calls you. With a nod, the toad snatched up the envelope and vanished in a puff of smoke. She turned to Naruto and Hinata, smirking, and said, all right you two, come with me and tell me all about your little date. Before either could argue, she put an arm around each of their necks and led them out of the hotel room with Kushina, Sume, and Yugo. Upon entering the hotel room, Shishiguro removed his mask and sank into a chair, using a gloved hand to massage his forehead. How bad was it? Yugo asked, observing him. Sume blinked in surprise as she questioned, how many assassins did Danzo send after you? Shishiguro replied, bad. Sume blinked as she questioned, only 3? With 2 Anbu against Danzo's inferiorly trained root, how is that bad? Shishiguro responded, including Kushina-sama. 3. If it's not assassins, then what is it? Sume asked, cocking her head to the side, in response to Yugo's statement that this isn't about assassins. Well, it could have been worse, Shishiguro complained, and Sume sighed. I had to pay for their check that Uzumaki brat is a glutton, and he ate a large hole in the money I carry on me. Shishiguro questioned, how? Sume grinned and responded, he could have been out with a female Akamichi. Shishiguro shuddered uncontrollably at the idea, blurting, well, now I know what my wallet's going to be having nightmares about for the next month. After putting aside the last of his paperwork, Jiraiya yawned once more and rubbed his temples while muttering, now I remember why I turned down being Hokage every time I was asked. The council is made up largely of bitchy little girls, all whining and moaning and making power plays of some sort or another. He closed his eyes and leaned his head against the cool desk, ready to fall asleep. Yo, Jiraiya-san. Gazing down at the orange and dark red toad on his desk, with his front feet resting on an envelope bearing his name in Tsunade's neat handwriting, Jiraiya's head snapped up. Gamakichi shrugged his amphibian shoulders and responded, don't know man, but boy is that lady scary, she threatened me. Course. I did call her a magic boob monster. Jiraiya asked, what does she want? Jiraiya picked up the letter and remarked, and you got away with only a threat? Man, you're a lucky one. He tore it open and unfolded the 2 pages of the notepad. He swiftly turned to the second page after reading the first. Gazing at Yugo's illustrations of Kushina and the different wounds and seal locations, he put them down, turned to face the little toad on his desk, and said, Gamakichi, I need you to go to the Yamanaka residence and get Inoichi and his daughter. Jiraiya nodded, then jumped off the desk and went out the window. Why? Gamakichi asked. Because I'm going to need them to help me see exactly how deep a person's mental scarring is. Jiraiya turned his dark eyes back to the desk pages and gazed at them, anger building in his chest at last. With a roar of frustration and rage, he stood up and slammed his fists onto the table. He snarled and snorted as he looked at the pages on his desk, already deciding what to do next. He first intended to go assist Tsunade and Inoichi in healing Kushina as best they could then. He then intended to go back to Konoha and destroy the very essence of Danzo, destroy him so thoroughly that his soul would be torn to pieces and left empty. He rubbed his eyes and took a deep, soothing breath before he collapsed in his chair and wondered if he could use Orochimaru's Edo Tensei to resurrect Sarutobi and kill the man. Dreams of Sakura and Naruto danced in Ino's mind as she buried herself deeper in her blankets and held the small plush fox closer to her chest, but she was interrupted by a knock on her door while she was dreaming about enjoying a Naruto Sakura sundae with chocolate syrup, whipped cream, and a cherry on top. As the door opened and her father appeared, fully outfitted for the mission, Ino muttered wisely, "Wah, who's that?" She asked, "What's the matter, Daddy?" as her pale blue eyes met hers, blinking away the sleep. Inoichi closed the door behind him and said, "Well, Princess, we've got a mission from the Hokage. Hurry up and get dressed. We're to meet him as quickly as possible." Ino asked, "What do you think's going on, Shu?" as she got out of bed and looked at the tiny stuffed fox on her bed. "Don't know either, huh? Oh well, guess I'll just have to find out when we get there," she sighed, not receiving a response. Glancing frowningly at the stuffed fox, she began to dress but stopped. The fox was facing the wall when she reached out and said, "No peeking, Ero Kitsune." As she and Inoichi stood in front of the Hokage's desk, the white-haired Sanin gazed at them, and Ino suppressed a yawn. Jiraiya smirked slightly as he saw Ino suppress his yawn and folded his hands on the oak desk before saying, "Sorry for the late meeting, Inoichi, Ino." Inoichi said, "It's all right, Hokage-sama." Ino nodded in agreement. Jiraiya's smirk vanished and was replaced stated, "But I promise you both that the reason for this meeting is very important. With your help, I believe I will have the evidence necessary to have a traitor within the walls of Konoha imprisoned for the kidnapping, torture, and enslavement of a Konoha nin, and if we can get into his secret documents, we will have the evidence required to execute them." Both Yamanaka gazed incredulously at the man with the white hair. How long had another Orochimaru been living inside Konoha's walls, and neither Sarutobi nor Tsunade had taken any action to stop them? When Ino asked, "Who is it?" the white-haired man replied, "I'm afraid that information can't be divulged at this time. It'll have to wait until we've reached the victim of their crimes. However, I want you both to look over these and give me a rough estimate of the possible damage they could have suffered emotionally." Inoichi handed over the 2 notepad sheets he received from Tsunade and glanced at the written page before glancing over to the drawings to collaborate on the descriptions. He studied them, then gave them to his daughter, who followed suit. Ino's face turned almost white as she read the words and compared them to the markings on the drawings, and she gave them back to Jiraiya with trembling hands, unlike her father. The elder Yamanaka put a reassuring hand on his daughter's shoulder and said, "Hokage-sama, to be perfectly honest, I can't begin to guess what her state is emotionally after this level of torture. All we can do is hope for the best and try to fix what we can." Ino nodded in agreement. Still appearing somewhat pale, Jiraiya asked, "So, what are your professional opinions on their emotional state?" "I was afraid of that," Jiraiya murmured, looking at the two of them. "Go home and get a good night's sleep. We leave in the morning at 0600 hours, and should reach Otafaku-gai in a couple of hours. Once there, we will meet up with the woman's doctor and see exactly what we're working with in regards to the victim. Are my orders misunderstood?" They both said, "No, Hokage-sama." Jiraiya nodded and responded, "Dismissed." Gamakichi leapt onto the desk and said, "Gamakichi, go to Tsunade and inform her that I, Inoichi, and Ino will be there tomorrow about 0830 hours." Jiraiya turned to watch the father-daughter duo leave the office. As he said, "Going to see Tsunade so soon?" After making a remark about her boobs, "I'd give you a bottle of sake if you asked." The small toad asked, "All right Jiraiya, can I get some candy first?" and reached into his vest to retrieve a small pouch of candy. Gamakichi took the small pouch from the white-haired man and disappeared in a puff of white smoke, saying, "No thanks, I need to be sober to keep my feet out of my mouth and the scary lady's heel out of my back." Jiraiya got up from his chair and stretched while he mumbled, "Kushina-chan, I'm going to do everything in my power to heal you. I swear it." He could hear his joints popping. Ino whispered, "It was horrible, Chu. I can't imagine anyone suffering that kind of torture and remaining sane. Then there's those seals. Who knows what they're doing to her mind." She put on her pajama shirt, crawled back into bed, and pressed the fox plush against her chest. "That's what Daddy said. We can only hope for the best and fix what we can. But what if we can't help her? What if she's beyond repair?" Ino said, nodding toward the tiny stuffed fox. "To be honest, I'm scared of what we might find in the woman's mind." With a smile on her face and a pat on the head, Ino said, "Of course you can come. Shu, I have a feeling that I'm going to need your support for what I'm going to face with Daddy tomorrow." "No, I will not tell you about my dreams. They're none of your business," she growled, her smile turning to a frown. She practically growled, turning her frown into a scowl. "Well, I don't care what I mumble in my sleep. I'm not telling you a damn thing, Ero Kitsune. Now I need to go to sleep and I suggest you do the same." "No, I will not do such a thing, and if you ever mention that again, you're sleeping outside," she exclaimed, her eyes widening in horror. With her arms folded across her chest, she snarled, "You'll tell Naruto? Tell him. He'll understand why I did it when I explain what exactly you asked me to do. You pervert. And we both know that he doesn't suffer perverts gladly." She would keep glaring at the toy fox. "That's better, Shu. Now good night." She nodded in confirmation, then embraced the fox to her chest before hastily falling asleep, her dreams haunted by the notes and images from her briefing with the Hokage. Naruto moaned and put his hands on his head while resting his chin on the table in front of him. Tsunade grinned at the unfortunate Hyuga, who was sitting next to him and was blonde and bright red. The slug princess was finding this to be too much fun, pushing all the right buttons to gradually humiliate them both to death. It appears that all she had to do to get Hinata to drop was to poke her a little harder. Tsunade asked, "So, what happened after your free dinner?" Naruto shot the older blonde a glare as he answered. We walked back to the hotel. As Hinata's gaze shifted to her fencing fingers, Tsunade asked, did you and your G-Earl friend hold hands? How about a little kiss? Naruto moaned, Ka-san. You're doing this on purpose. Tsunade replied smugly, of course I am. It's a mother's right to embarrass her Sochi as much as possible. Naruto gave her a silent glare and threatened to pull numerous practical jokes in retaliation. Before Tsunade could begin again, two Anbu showed up beside the table with masks over their faces and hands behind their backs. Shishiguro said, hello Tsunade-sama. Naruto-san. Hinata-san, me and Kat have been sent by Jiraiya-sama to protect you from possible dangers. She recognized the pair right away. I remember you guys. You helped me with the Hokage monument, Naruto said, examining the two. Hinata turned to Shishiguro and whispered, you sound familiar, Yugo said, that we did. Naruto-san, we felt the need to aid you in your community project involving the monument, and I must say, it caused quite a stir when it was revealed. What makes you say that? Shishiguro asked, taking off his mask to reveal his face. I haven't seen Naruto-san in a few days, and I'm afraid to say that I've never met you in person before today, he said. Yo, you were the waiter from the restaurant, cried Naruto, gaping at the man and pointing. I am afraid that I have never held the job of waiter, Shishiguro said, maintaining a straight face. I have been a shinobi since I was 13, a chunin at 15, a junin at 18, and joined the Anbu Corps at 23. As he pointed to Shishiguro, who looked directly into Naruto's eyes, he exclaimed, I fear you are mistaken. Naruto-san, I wasn't at a restaurant tonight. I was on my way here with my teammate. I saw you tonight at the restaurant. I remember those scars, Naruto exclaimed. As Tsunade watched the blonde gradually lose her mind and accuse the Anbu agent of being a waiter, her shoulders started to shake from suppressing her laughter. The Hyuga nodded in agreement as Naruto said, Hinata-chan, he's the waiter, isn't he? She herself became a little irritated by this. Yugo said, alright Shishiguro, that's enough, we don't want our ward to have an Inuri SM over this, do we? Before removing her mask and giving Shishiguro a quick elbow to the ribs. The man smiled at the two recently minted chunin and said, I was indeed your waiter. Tonight I was there to guard and protect you from any potential harm that may try to befall you. Alright. Naruto questioned, like what? Tsunade answered, assassins sent by Danzo, mostly. When Naruto asked, Danzo? Yugo replied, the one-eyed, one-armed cripple with the walking stick you might see skulking around like a cockroach. With a frown, Naruto recalled how much the mummy man irritated the Sandame, saying, oh him Sarutobi Gigi was always complaining about him. Tsunade thought bitterly, should have done more than simply complained, but her thoughts were quickly dashed when Gamakichi emerged in a puff of smoke. The toad bowed, looking around, and remarked, Jiraiya says he, Inoichi, and Ino will hear about 0930 hours tomorrow morning. As Hinata questioned, why are they coming tomorrow? Tsunade said, thank you, Gamakichi, you're excused. The little toad shrewdly vanished in a puff of smoke. We found someone who suffered extreme emotional distress and has several seals on them. We require Jiraiya to see to the seals, and Inoichi and his daughter to see to the extreme emotional distress. Tsunade responded, and Hinata gasped as she, that's horrible. Tsunade responded, you don't know the half of it. Shishiguro then said, anyway, while we're here, we're going to discuss your training regimen. The two Anbu then sat down at the table. Naruto's eyes widened in anticipation as he asked, training? His whole body seemed to tremble as the barely controlled anxiety quickly consumed him. Yugo grinned at his enthusiastic reaction and remarked, ah, eager already, young chunin. Well then, you're going to love what we have in store for you, Hinata and Sakura then. Sume sighed as she lay on one of the three beds, gazing up at the ceiling and reflecting on the conversation she and Tsunade had been having before her friend Kushina's unexpected return. Is Tsunade correct? I don't want to let go of Kiru, so I'm afraid that if I love Naruto, I'll forget or dishonor her. Or is it just that I'm scared to let myself love Naruto? He's a 13-year-old boy, Sume thought, shaking her head in response. For heaven's sake, I have a son his age. Is it even possible for me to love someone who is more than 20 years my junior? But the more she considered it, the less crazy it appeared to be. According to the laws of Konoha and every other shinobi village, he was legally an adult. Additionally, he had to mature quickly because he had been living alone since he was 5 years old. Undoubtedly immature. But Sume had encountered older Mina Kakashi in particular who were much more immature than the blonde orange lover. Knowing that the two were likely already clicking, Sume thought bitterly, but he deserves someone his own age, like Hinata, and not an old maid like me. He and Hinata falling in love, getting married, and having a bunch of puppies is for the best. He has a younger bitch like Hinata, so there's no reason for him to bother with an old bitch like me. Sume's mind drifted to Kushina, already determining that she didn't like the direction this line of thought was taking. The thought of what her poor friend had to go through at Danzu's hands sent a shudder up her spine. How could Hokage-sama have overlooked a monster such as Danzo? Was he truly blind to that old cripple's evil behavior? Sume pondered as she gazed up at the ceiling, hoping it would provide the answers to her queries. Sume closed her eyes and went to bed, saying out loud, "My life was much easier back when my crush on Naruto was nothing more than a dirty little secret never to see the light of day." It seemed to her that she would require it for tomorrow. She was so absorbed in her thoughts that she failed to notice the door, which was slightly open, close all the way. As they watched Naruto hop and jump around like a little kid, crying and whooping about how amazing of a ninja he was going to become with training from two Anbu and Tsunade Ka-san. Tsunade, Yugo, Shishiguro, and Hinata grinned. Tsunade laughed as she responded, "Don't worry about Naruto, Shishiguro-san, he's going to have more energy than you'll know what to do with come tomorrow." Shishiguro had warned the child to relax or else he wouldn't have the energy for training tomorrow. The man smiled and crossed his arms over his chest, saying, "Ah, I see, so it's going to be a contest of Naruto's energy against my training regimen. Well, I happen to have learned this training regimen from the best of them. In fact, it became the basis of Guy Senpai's training regimen, the one he's using with Rock Lee." "You know bushy brows and super bushy brows?" Naruto asked, pausing when he noticed this and turning to face the Anbu agent. "So I'm going to get training like bushy brows?" Yugo asked, smirking. "Of course, me, super bushy brows, and Shishiguro were on a genin squad together, after all." Naruto stared in disbelief. "Well, similar though a lot less insane than that used by Guy Senpai," Yugo responded, and Naruto smiled as he, "Well, either way, the next time I see Sasuke Teme, I'm going to pound him so hard he'll never think about trying to leave Konoha again." Naruto answered Shishiguro's question, "Why? Because he'll be trying to get me to train him and give him just a little of my pure awesome." Tsunade grinned and said, "You might be right there, Sochi." Hinata laughed as Naruto started striking poses that were so cheesy and masculine that they would have embarrassed Guy and Lee. Yugo called out, "All right, brat, sit down before you pull something." Naruto said, "Hi, sensei," and ceased posing. Naruto sighed as he said, "He lost my respect the first day and never quite won it back." Shishiguro said, "You know, you never gave Kakashi this level of respect." Shishiguro watched the blonde obediently take his seat. "Well then, the three of us are going to have to work hard to make sure we don't lose your respect then, won't we?" Yugo asked, and Naruto smiled as he, "Ka-san doesn't have to worry about losing my respect." Tsunade reached across the table to ruffle his hair affectionately and said, "Ah brat, you're too sweet." Naruto responded with a pouting glare, which only made the blonde woman pinch his cheek and remark, "You're so cute when you're angry." The two Anbu laughed at the scene in front of them as Hinata apologetically giggled as Naruto's pout only got bigger, making the former Hokage even more irate. Tsunade pulled both of Naruto's cheeks as he growled at the woman's teasing, and Yugo warned, "You're only making it worse on yourself by keeping that look on your face." With a gleam in her eye, Tsunade commanded, "Sochi, you make me just want to cuddle you." Before Naruto could object, he was physically taken out of his chair, dragged across the table, and wrapped in Tsunade's surprisingly powerful arms, his head threatening to vanish into the Sannin's chest. Naruto cried out, his face flushed with shame, "Hinata-chan, help me." He reached out to the girl, but before she could intervene to save her crush, Yugo and Shishiguro put their hands on her shoulders and uttered the words, "It's too late for him, Hinata-san." Naruto squawked, "Traitors." Tsunade just grinned, thinking, "Call me Ba-chan, will you brat?" Tsunade nuzzled the top of his head with her cheek and crooned, "Ah, you're just like a little plush doll, Naruto Sochi." The other three watched as his face turned beet red and he struggled more frantically to escape the humiliation. Danzo paced his bedroom, a sensation he believed he had long since lost rushing through him like the lava of a seemingly dormant volcano rising to the surface and tearing through stone and cooled magma. It was consuming him from the inside out, rising to the surface at a terrifying rate, and holding his heart in a death grip that it refused to let go of. He was afraid Danzo continued to pace, but he stopped when a terrifying thought occurred to him. The only reason that fool Jiraiya would call in Inoichi and his brat at this time of night would be because he needs information from someone unable to talk, and the only people in Konoha who are unable to talk are my knee units. It took all of his restraint not to scream into the night as he thought, "They captured Kushina-chan." His only visible eye widened at the prospect of Jiraiya discovering his secret weapon. Even though Danzo was aware that he was still among Konoha's most formidable ninja, he was unable to ignore the fact that age was gradually diminishing his abilities. Even though Danzo's mind was sharper than ever, he was ashamed to acknowledge that he had let the years of peace erode his fighting abilities. And his current superior was probably Jiraiya, who traveled the world while continuously improving his fighting abilities against both strong and weak opponents. The Yamanaka could and would, with a little effort, discover the full extent of what he had done to Kushina in order to subjugate her, particularly after Jiraiya had taken off the seals that had been applied to her. He turned to use one of his escape strategies, but he was stopped when he noticed a man wearing orange spiral mask with only a left eye hole and black robes embroidered with red clouds with a cup of tea in one hand. The stranger was now reading in the chair the older man kept next to his bookcase. When the masked man realized he was being watched, he lifted his cup in greeting and nodded to the man with the bandage. Danzo stiffened as he asked, "Who are you?" The masked man said, "Hello, Danzo-san, it's a pleasure to meet you." As he lifted his mask just enough to take a sip of his tea, My name's Toby, and I have an offer that you can't refuse if you wish to remain alive." Frowning, Danzo sat down on his bed and uttered, "I'm listening." Good. On the middle bed in his hotel room, Naruto slept with his arms spread wide, his walrus hat resting clumsily on his head, and his pillow soaked with drool. Hinata slept in the bed to his right. Her posture was more subdued even when she was asleep, which is indicative of her Hyuga ancestry. Sume, who had somehow turned around in bed, was on his left. She was snoozing softly, her limbs spread wide, and her head pointing toward the foot of her bed. However, the smallest sound jarred her sleep, causing one eye to open, its slitted pupil surveying her surroundings before focusing on the intruder. One of their new Anbu bodyguards was standing at the foot of Naruto's bed, wearing shorts and a gray t-shirt. He saw her observing him with a smirk on his scarred face. He showed her the mallet in his right arm and lifted his left to show her a small gong dangling from a piece of wood on tiny chains. Sume sat up and settled in, smirking, as Shishiguro prepared the gong, swung the mallet, and slammed it into the gong. After rearing his arm back, the hotel room was filled with a loud, reverberating sound, and its effects were immediately apparent. Hinata, the shy girl who was determined to keep her friends safe, jumped up in bed, her eyes already burning with the Byakugan. However, Naruto yelled in terror and fell off the bed, landing in a heap on the floor before he jumped to his feet and prepared to fight. But when they saw their assailant, they both calmed down and ignored Sume, who was lying on the other bed and laughing uncontrollably. Looking at the watch on his right wrist, Naruto said, 30 minutes more than enough time to do so. What the hell? Naruto asked, glaring at the smirking man who lowered his gong and said, time for training, kiddies. Get up and get dressed in a comfortable pair of shorts and a loose t-shirt. I want to see you on the hotel steps at 0600 hours, giving you. When training was mentioned, Naruto's negative attitude vanished, and by the time he heard Shishiguro say, while I admire the enthusiasm, Naruto-san, I think you should have waited until you were in the bathroom. Well, unless you were wanting to give the ladies a show. He was already stripping, his pajama pants and green-toed boxers pooling around his ankles. Naruto turned to face the smirking man, who had a puzzled expression on his face and his left arm folded across his eyes until he had a terrible epiphany. Hinata and Sume were both turned away and blushing wildly when blue eyes darted to the other two beds. Then he looked down and saw that he had unintentionally made himself vulnerable to Sume and Hinata. With his face turning a deep scarlet, he yelled and handed his package to the person running into the attached restroom, only to fall face first to the ground after tripping over the clothing that was still wrapped around his ankles. However, he ignored it and scurried on his hands and knees into the bathroom, where the door slammed behind him. After hearing the bathroom door slam, Shishiguro lowered his arm and said, well now, that was an interesting sight, wasn't it, ladies? I guess I'll leave you alone to get ready for the day. He also chuckled and combed his hair. He hummed to himself as he left the hotel room, slinging the gong over his left shoulder. As Hinata wiped the blood from beneath her nose, she noticed Sume doing the same, a blush that the young heiress was all too familiar with adorning her face. When the bathroom door opened a little, the younger girl frowned quietly and was debating whether or not to ask the older woman. The boy asked sheepishly, can someone get my shorts, t-shirt, and boxers from my bag, please? Hinata saw Sume get out of bed and hastily retrieve the things she had asked for from his orange bag, throwing them into the bathroom through the tiny hole the blonde had created. Naruto said, thanks. The door closed behind him. Sume felt eyes on her as she walked back to her bed and lay down. She looked at Hinata, who was staring at her as though she wanted to say something but wasn't sure if she should. After a few moments of silence, the former Inuzuka head finally rolled over onto her side and asked, what is it, Hinata? Out of a mixture of curiosity and annoyance. With her eyes darting to the bathroom door, Hinata flushed and tapped her fingers together before whispering, "Do you love Naruto-kun too, Sume-san?" "Oh, how could you say something like that?" Sume asked in a strained whisper, her eyes widening as she sprang to her feet, resembling a trapped animal. She said, "You were blushing far too much not to care for him deeply, and I saw you wiping blood from your upper lip. You know as well as I that Hyuga are well versed in reading the emotions of others, even if I'm not that good of a Hyuga to begin with." Hinata, observing the woman's reaction, smiled softly. Having heard of the girl's stubbornness toward the blonde, Sume sighed in defeat as she said, "You're right, Hinata, damn, am I that easy to read?" Sume silently stared at the pale-eyed girl, observing the gentle yet insidious look that assured the elder of the two that the girl was confident of her belief. "I always thought he got that from his father. Guess I was wrong now, about Naruto." Sume grinned as Hinata whispered, "Kiba's no good at hiding his emotions either." Sume responded, "Don't be ridiculous, Hinata, you deserve him much more than me, and besides, I'm too old for the blonde." Hinata concluded, "It's okay. Sume-san, I won't stand in your way." In response, Hinata scowled and said, "You'd be much better for him than me. I won't be a good wife for someone as special as him." Sume responded, growing impatient with Hinata's unique form of self-deprivation that threatened to compete with her own, at least when it came to Naruto. "Yeah, and an old bat like me is so much better. If anyone is good for him, it's someone his own age, like you, or maybe Sakura, once she figures herself out." With her own frustration starting to overwhelm her, Hinata exclaimed, "But I'm worthless. Naruto doesn't deserve to be saddled with someone as hopeless as me." Sume nearly snarled in response, saying, "Yes you do. If anything, he doesn't deserve to be saddled with a dried-up bitch like me, especially compared to you." Hinata's statement, "I love Naruto too much to force him to be with me, especially when he can have you," would be interpreted by those who knew her as a shout for the shy girl. Sume, barely able to control her temper, retorted, "Right, and I want to force him to be with a withered old crone like me when he can have a beautiful young maiden like you," at the thick-headed teen across from her. The bathroom door opened before Hinata could react, revealing Naruto, wearing a gray t-shirt with the words, "No pain. No problem," printed on it and tucked into forest green shorts. Naruto grinned and tossed his filthy clothes into a laundry hamper, exclaiming, "It's open, Hinata-chan." Hinata nodded, picked up her own training attire, and went into the restroom, glancing over Naruto's shoulder at Sume, which made the older woman frown at the younger. After blinking, Naruto turned to see Hinata close the bathroom door. "What am I missing?" he asked, sighing and scratching his head before turning back to face Sume. "So she knows your secret, huh?" Tsunade asked her breakfast partner as she took a sip of her coffee. "Yeah." Sume raised her head to gaze at the blonde Sanin as she said, "I wish it was that easy, but she seems as determined that she's not worthy for his love as I am." Tsunade asked, "So, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to fight for your prize, or are you going to roll over and show her your tender belly?" Sume blinked and questioned, "What?" Tsunade said, "What an interesting twist on the classic love triangle." Tsunade responded, taking another sip of her coffee, "Two women are in love with the same man, except that instead of fighting for his love, each believes the other deserves him more, not feeling worthy of such a special man." Sume put her head back on the table and mumbled, "Yay me," she let out a groan. "Cheer up, Sume, I say that since neither you nor Hinata believe you're fully worthy of Naruto, you share him. I'm certain that both of you working together can be more than enough for our young Uzumaki." Tsunade responded. Sume snapped her head up at this, silently staring at the former Hokage for a few long moments before exclaiming, "What?" Sume appeared to consider it for a few seconds before responding, "That's actually totally insane." Tsunade said, "You heard me." "How so?" Tsunade inquired, and Sume responded, "Because you not only expect me to have a relationship with Naruto, but to share him with Hinata, and have him be okay with that." Tsunade grinned and said, "Well, of course he'd be okay with it." Sume then questioned, "How do you know?" Sume simply shook her head and responded, "There's no way to get you to possibly reconsider such an idea, is there?" Tsunade said, "If there's one thing Naruto is, it's unconventional, and such an unconventional relationship seems to fit him just perfectly." With her arms folded beneath her chest, Tsunade gazed at the woman with the tattoos across from her and remarked, "Nope, I can be as stubborn as Naruto when I really want to. How do we do this?" Sume sighed in defeat. Tsunade then presented her plan to her friend, and much to Sume's dismay, it was not only straightforward but also entirely reasonable. Tsunade asked, "So, what do you think?" Sume moaned, "It might work, damn it." Tsunade said, "You worry too much, you know that? and Tsume just moaned once more while pressing her forehead to the table. With their arms folded across their chests, Yugo and Shishiguro stood in front of the three Chunin when Sakura scowled at Yugo. The pink-haired girl asked, "Is something the matter, Sakura-san?" And Yugo simply smirked back at her, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, there is. Why do you have to wake me up so early?" "Kakashi never," Sakura started. But Shishiguro interrupted her as she replied, "That's right, neither I nor Yugo-senpai or Kakashi were going to be punctual to each training session, and we expect the same of all of you also. We will train you to the best of our abilities as equally as possible, so we expect each of you to work as hard as you can." "Yada!" exclaimed Naruto, leaping with delight and pumping his fists. Yugo laughed as he said, "Well Naruto, since you're still so excited about training, then you can lead this little squad of ours on a nice long jog." Sakura exclaimed, "What?" Yugo turned to face the pinkette as though she had taken a second look and said, "Did I mutter? Did you misunderstand me? I said that you, Naruto, and Hinata are going to take a nice, long jog. Now you better hurry up or else you're going to have to do the jog alone." "Wha?" Sakura asked, turning to see Naruto and Hinata already jogging down the street while Naruto shouted, "Hurry up, Sakura-chan," and waved. After Sakura gave Yugo a stern look and left with the other two, Yugo grinned behind the pinkette and remarked, "Despise us all you like, you just better do what we say." "So, how long do you think it'll take until the pinkette wants to murder us?" Yugo asked her teammate, who smirked. With a raised eyebrow, Shishiguro responded, "That long, huh? I believe she's already wishing up most horrible and blood-curdling demises as we speak, though I'm more interested if we can actually break Naruto-san's spirited love of training." Yugo responded, "I give her until the end of the jog." Yugo let out a sigh and stated, "If even half the stories told by Jiraiya-sama are true, then I believe that we'll run out of things to teach him long before he loses that spirited love of his." Yugo responded, "Yeah, and we both know how well that turned out." Shishiguro stated, "I do believe Sensei thought she could do the same to Gai-senpai, if I'm not mistaken. We're going to have to be careful with Naruto-san and not go overboard with the training lest we make a third Gai-senpai. The world has too many as it stands," Yugo said, causing the two to exchange glances. "To say nothing of the fact that Tsunade-sama, Hinata-san, Sakura-san, Shizune-senpai, and Tsume-sama will kill us if we cause Naruto to start running around screaming about the springtime of youth, dressed in tight orange spandex," said Shishiguro. However, Yugo simply grinned and remarked, "Though I doubt Hinata-san or Tsume-sama would be too angry about Naruto dressed in tight spandex." "Yeah," Shishiguro said, turning to face Yugo. "Huh?" Yugo smiled and said, "For a feared Anbu Shishiguro, you can be absolutely clueless sometimes, you know that?" Shishiguro blinked, feeling as though he had been left out of something, but he wasn't sure what. Sighing, Yugo said, "Follow the brats and make sure they don't kill themselves on this jog. Wouldn't do to kill them within the first hour, would it?" After saying, "All right," Shishiguro headed after the three teenagers, easily catching up to them and noticing that Sakura was already starting to get tired. Shishiguro's already poor opinion of the former Anbu continued to deteriorate as he observed her growing more exhausted by the minute. "Damn Kakashi, you screwed up bad with this girl," he thought. With Shu snugly nestled under her shirt on her back and his head peeking over her shoulder to see where they were heading, Ino followed her father and Jiraiya as they hopped through the trees toward Otafaku Gai. After hearing something, Ino grinned and said, "I will too. And then he'll get mad at you for being such an arrow kitsune. Shu, you keep asking me that, and I'm going to tell Naruto." After a few moments, Ino smirked and said, "I thought so. Now be a good fox and stop trying to look at my chest. I don't care if you've been his friend so long. He doesn't like perverts, and you are being very perverted, to say nothing of the how rude," Ino cried. With a quick glance back, Jiraiya turned to face Inoichi, who said, "Yua, do you know what's with the fox toy? She's been talking to it for a while." Inoichi sighed and replied, "I don't know. Naruto brought it over to the house for Ino to care for, and I thought it was a companion cube for Naruto at first. I thought she was just playing along with Naruto's fantasy, but now I'm starting to worry she's starting to develop a split personality with that toy, if her interactions with it are any indication." Looking at their backs, Ino replied, "It's impolite to talk about people behind their backs, Daddy. And you should know better too. Hokage-sama. Can you believe them, Chu?" Ino gaped at the large back of the Sannin for a few moments before settling into a silent frown. Jiraiya smirked and retorted, "But we're right in front of you, Ino-san, so we're not talking behind your back. You're eavesdropping on our conversation." Inoichi sighed and said, "Please don't antagonize her, Hokage-sama." As they continued to jump in the direction of their target, Jiraiya merely grinned, but as he grinned at Inoichi, his mind continued to focus on their patient and, more crucially, what would happen when they arrived at Otafaku Gai. Kushina Minato Naruto, how can I ever make up for all the times I've let you down? Kushina, I ought to have been there to keep you safe from Danzo instead of you. Minato, I ought to have given my life to seal the Kyuubi. And most importantly, I should have acted as your godfather. Naruto, I should have been there to keep you safe from the likes of Danzo and even Sarutobi-sensei, he thought, feeling an ache in his chest as he thought of the man he considered a son's only child. Naruto, what would have happened if I had supported you? Would you have been protected? Better for your health? More content? If there had been just one person to keep an eye on you, Naruto, how would your life have turned out? But I'm going to start repaying those failures today, and I'm going to make sure that Danzo pays for his too, he thought, his eyes hardening. As the three of them entered Otafaku Gai, Jiraiya appeared unusually reserved, which made Inoichi turn to face the white-haired man and inquire, is it really bothering you that much, Jiraiya-sama? The Yamanaka patriarch and his daughter stopped, staring at the new Hokage in stunned silence as he turned his dark eyes on the two blondes and sighed deeply before saying, there's really no point in hiding the facts of our patient any longer, I guess. What about the woman could be so significant that he felt compelled to keep it from them? Ino asked, what do you mean? Jiraiya began to walk slowly while scanning the area for possible spies. Well, our patient isn't just another shinobi, her name is Uzumaki Kushina, and until yesterday, she was presumed dead during the Kyuubi attack, he said. Uzumaki? As in, Ino asked, as Jiraiya was already putting the grin and replied, yes, she's Naruto's mother. That's when we believe her to have been kidnapped and tortured to weaken her resistance to the seals used on her by the traitor to bring her in line, so that he could control her normally. He doesn't bother with adults, preferring to train orphans at a very young age due to their susceptibility to such things. However, her skills impressed him enough to put in the work necessary to have an adult. Inoichi smiled and said, let's hurry and meet with Tsunade-sama so that we can see what exactly can be done for the poor woman. Jiraiya shook his head in response to Ino's question, does Naruto know? I doubt so, at least until we see if we can possibly heal her. Inoichi responded, but why? To the younger Yamanaka's question, because if he were to finally find his biological mother, only to have her be little more than an empty shell, not truly alive yet not dead, it would destroy him emotionally. Jiraiya grinned and said, but don't worry Ino, as soon as she's better, we'll make sure the first thing we do is tell Naruto and let him meet his mother. Despite her obvious discomfort with concealing it from her fellow blonde, Ino said, okay. The white-haired sage simply grinned and replied, don't worry about it, Inoichi-san, I've got someone watching over the council. While I'm away I wouldn't worry about anything with my guys on the job. Inoichi had asked, Jiraiya-sama, if you don't mind me asking, who's watching over Konoha while we're here? Really? Who? Inoichi inquired, wanting to know who it might be. Well, Homura fixed his gaze on the Hokage's wooden desk, or more precisely, the hat that rested upon it. He mumbled, it figures not even one day and Jiraiya's already gone off peeking, leaving no one in charge of the village, as he looked around. Something said, hey, I resent that, he left me in charge, as if it were speechless as Homura turned to face the desk. His eyebrows shot up as he gingerly grasped the hat and raised it, exposing the little orange toad wearing a blue vest underneath, which gave the man a frustrated glare. The little toad screamed, who said you could take my hat? Homura asked, that fool actually left you in charge? And dropped the hat in surprise. The toad said, well, only partially. Homura questioned, what do you mean only partially? The toad puffed out his chest and said, he left Big Bro in charge to help but mostly only in enforcement. I'm the brains behind this setup. Homura asked, who is this big brother of yours? And a deep voice behind him said, me? Homura turned quickly and saw a big, deep red toad with a basento strapped to his back on his back. The little toad responded, he's Goroshi, he's kinda like the Akamichi, only a toad, he can get much bigger than that, but Pop'll get mad if we cause harm to the office unnecessarily. When Homura asked, where'd you come from? The smaller toad smiled as he said, and my name's Gamakichi, but you can call me Hokage, or simply Gama-sama. Homura answered, I see. But I'm still Hokage, if only temporarily. Gamakichi growled at the bigger toad as Goroshi remarked, but you're only a temp while Jiraiya-san's away on business. Goroshi said, you're still a temp. Gamakichi snorted and puffed out his cheeks in response, saying, stop making fun of me. After slipping past Goroshi and out the office door, Homura whispered, I'll just leave you two to your work. This allowed the brothers to argue peacefully. While Naruto and Hinata, both drenched in sweat, watched their friend anxiously. Yugo couldn't help but sigh as she looked over their 3 students and saw Sakura doubled over behind a tree, retching up her dinner from the previous evening. Naruto asked, "Is she going to be okay?" Shishiguro grinned and replied, "Don't worry, happens when you overexert yourself during exercise, just means she'll have to sit and rest for a bit." Naruto nodded as the pinkhead shuffled over, still looking rather pale, finding a seat and rubbing her stomach in an attempt to stop the apparent revolution taking place inside. In response to Yugo's question, "Well, this was certainly an informative experience, wouldn't you agree, Shishiguro?" The man nodded and replied, "Definitely, Yugo-senpai." "What are you talking about?" Naruto asked, and Shishiguro responded, "Namely, how exactly we're going to handle your training. We've already got the general outline of your individual training regimens decided, but watching the 3 of you jog, go through the standard exercise routine most genin should use, and also a light spar has helped us fine-tune those outlines into a true plan. Hyuga Hinata, we'll need to work on your chakra amount the most. Your endurance could use some work as well, but it's not something we need to worry too much about. Also, your catalog of ninjutsu can also benefit from some bolstering as well, but that will be Tsunade's area. However, as expected of a Hyuga, your taijutsu is superb," Yugo said as Hinata nodded softly at the compliment. "Uzumaki Naruto, we'll need to work on your chakra control and taijutsu the most. Your endurance and chakra amount are both excellent. Your ninjutsu catalog, while being small, is incredibly powerful, so while Tsunade'll be bolstering it like Hinata, it is not a necessity to do so we can work on the aforementioned chakra control and taijutsu." Shishiguro looked at the blonde and nodded. Sighing, Yugo glanced at the still pal stated, "Sakura, to be honest, you're a mess. Your chakra control is the best, but your chakra amount is limited quite substantially. Also, your endurance is at the level one sees from a fresh academy student. Same as your ninjutsu and taijutsu. All in all, it seems you've all but stalled in any form of real training once you graduated from the academy, save for tree walking." Naruto scowled and glared at his new senseis as he exclaimed, "Hey, Sakura-chan's real smart and skilled." Sakura turned to the ground, embarrassed by what had been said. Looking at the irritated blonde, Shishiguro replied, "Naruto, we are merely speaking the truth in regards to Sakura. While I agree that she is indeed smart, intelligence can only go so far in the world of shinobi, where life and death can hang on a split second in the middle of battle." Sakura placed her hand on the blonde's forearm as she said, "Naruto, they're right, I should have taken my training more seriously." Naruto started to say, "Yeah, but..." "Sakura, while some of the blame does fall upon you, a lot of it rests squarely on Kakashi's shoulders. He should have forced you to be more serious in your training, taught you more ninjutsu, and had you doing exercise and making sure you improved. The only reason Naruto's as skilled as he is seems to be largely from self-motivation, as well as happening upon Jiraiya-sama during the month before the Chunin exam finals. If he had done what he was supposed to, both you and Naruto would not require have such glaring flaws fixed," Shishiguro clarified. The trio nodded in agreement, thrilled by Yugo's words. "But don't worry, we're going to work all 3 of you hard, but if you do as we say, by the time we're done with you 3, you will be to the standards of Anbu, I promise." Sakura and Hinata shuddered at the gleam in their teacher's eyes as Shishiguro said, "Now, you 3 continue to rest, and once you're refreshed, we'll begin some serious physical training." Yugo and Shishiguro both gave the 3 a rather gloomy grin at this. But Naruto just grinned back, his eyes brimming with excitement. Tsume was concerned about the renowned pervert glaring at the woman who was long thought to be deceased by those who looked after her when the white-haired Sanin had entered the hotel room a few hours prior, but he had assumed the demeanor of a shinobi of his rank from the moment he walked in. There were no lewd jokes, no leering looks at the woman who was hardly clothed, and not even a trace of his notorious notebook. The man's attention shifted from a seal to a large binder of notes on seals in at least 3 different handwriting that was miles above her head, and then back to the seal he was working on. It almost seemed as though he was unaware that the seals were on a woman who was only wearing her underwear. The big man's only sounds were the pages turning in the binder, his muttering to himself, and occasionally his writing in a black notebook as he attempted to decipher the seals. To be honest, Tsume could see the renowned shinobi who trained the Yellow Flash Namikaze Minato and whose name alone inspired fear and awe in many hidden villages, rather than the shady pornographer who routinely peered into the women's onsen wherever he went. Tsume nodded in response to Tsunade's question. "Quite the amazing transformation, isn't it? Yeah, I'd heard of his feats and skills as a shinobi, but I never expected that the self-proclaimed super pervert could become something like this. It's like I told you, he exaggerates who he really is, afraid to let others get too close. This is the true Jiraiya, the man they wanted to be Hokage before me." Tsunade grinned softly as she observed her at work. Inoichi nodded and added, It seems that most of our village's strongest shinobi suffer from at least one abnormal trait, whether it be perversion, abrasiveness, or chronic laziness. Strength seems to go hand in hand with instability. He also smiled a little. Inoichi grinned and responded, "Of course not, you're just incredibly abrasive. That's not an unstable quality at all." Sume growled, "I'm not unstable." Sume scowled at the blonde, who continued to sneer at the woman with the untamed appearance. Shizune, meanwhile, sighed happily as she walked down the street drinking tea with Ino and Tondon faithfully following, speaking to the stuffed fox beneath her arm. Ino occasionally licked at her chocolate and mint ice cream cone before saying, "No chew. You cannot have any of my ice cream, you don't even have a stomach, much less a working mouth to eat it with." Shizune asked softly, "Ino, you do realize that's a stuffed animal and not alive, right?" as he looked worriedly at the young Yamanaka. Ino turned to the fox and growled, "No, I will not ask her to do that." After asking, "Huh?" Shizune watched with blinked eyes as Ino got into a heated, one-sided argument with the stuffed animal. Furthermore, Ino appeared to be upset about whatever it was they were fighting about, which only made Shizune more anxious as time went on, because Ino was actually becoming upset. While arguing with herself, she heard a certain blonde's voice calling out to her as she prepared to ask Inoichi to examine his own daughter's mind. She noticed Naruto and Hinata approaching them. As she looked up, Hinata looked almost completely incapacitated, while Naruto, despite being sweaty and looking worn out, seemed to still be full of energy. Shishiguro and Yugo were behind them, the purple-haired woman with the pale, unconscious Sakura on her back in a piggyback position. Ino grinned and exclaimed, "Hey Naruto, Hinata," before turning to face Yugo, or more precisely, Sakura, and asking, "Is forehead okay?" With a grin on his face, Naruto replied, "Yeah, Sakura-chan's okay. We just got done with 2 hours of training, and, well, it seems that Sakura-chan isn't used to heavy training yet, though even I'm a little tired too after the workout they put us through." Hinata whispered, "Torture?" Naruto raised his eyebrows and said, "It wasn't that bad, was it, Hinata-chan?" Shishiguro simply sighed and spoke, "It's not our fault you and Pinky are lightweights. We did warn you that we'd have you both up to Anbu standards, and this is only the morning workout. In fact, the only reason we've even stopped is due to your third teammate losing consciousness." She acknowledged with a silent nod. "Damn near killing yourself isn't going to help you get better, both of you." He sighed once more and muttered, "She should have told us that she wasn't feeling well." He then glared at Naruto, who appeared perplexed as he asked, "What?" "We've heard the tales of you working yourself to the point you fall unconscious not just once, but several times. In fact, if I find out that you've done that again under me and Yugo, we will personally tie you to a bed and keep you from training for a week. Maybe 2. Shishiguro said, and Naruto looked at the disbelief. "Yo, you can't do that." "We can, and we will, Naruto. We don't want to see you hurt yourself by straining your body so severely, and I'm certain not only Tsunade, but the others agree as well." Yugo replied calmly, and before he could continue intervened with the words, "They're right, Naruto-kun, we want you to get stronger and be a successful shinobi, but we also don't want you to hurt yourself by way of repeated overexertion from such training." "Okay. You guys win." Naruto turned to face Hinata, who appeared concerned about the situation. Hinata grinned in relief and put her arms around Naruto in a tender embrace, which made the boy blush and Ino snicker. Ino grinned and said, "Oh, it seems I've missed something big between you two." Hinata realized what she was doing and let out a little eep. Leaping away from Naruto, he was flushed. Ino's grin widened until she started giggling, which made Naruto blush and glare at his fellow blonde, who then started laughing uncontrollably and started crying. Jiraiya reclined in his chair and studied the pages of notes he had made about Kushina's body being adorned with seals. He smirked, then chuckled, then let out a deep, booming laugh as he examined them closely. "What's so funny, you old pervert?" Tsunade asked, raising an eyebrow. In between chuckles, Jiraiya said, "Well, it's just that these seals are so basic in design that they're practically academic." "What? You mean we could have done it ourselves?" Sume inquired, and Jiraiya, taking in himself, replied, "Not at all. Now, let me explain. When I say that, I mean when compared to the work of true seal masters, this stuff is basic. Whoever wrote them are indeed skilled, but I'd put their skills at intermediate at best. The connections between the 4 on her body is quite obvious, and the language, though technical, is still quite easy to understand for a person with sufficient knowledge of seals." "And the one on her tongue?" Tsunade asked, and Jiraiya responded, "Completely unrelated to the others. It's a basic seal used to keep someone from speaking certain information, this one most likely regarding to Danzo and his more traitorous schemes." Any trace of humor vanished from the Sanin's face as he sighed and replied, "Yes, unfortunately I need the blood of the Yondaime to do so." Tsunade said, "I see, but the important question is, can you undo the seals?" What? Sume asked, and Jiraiya responded. They were indeed tricky bastards, though their knowledge of writing seals was basic. They knew enough to put a failsafe like that into it. So the Yondaime. Inoichi started out by saying, no, Minato knew nothing of this, considering she didn't go missing until after his sacrifice, and that this work is so beneath him, even insinuating that he had a hand in them is an insult to his skill. They most likely gather blood from one of his checkups to write these seals. As Sume questioned, so we can't help her? Jiraiya smiled back, of course not, we've got a living reservoir of the Yondaime's blood in this very city. Sume said, who? And Tsunade, Inoichi, and Jiraiya said, Naruto? Sume questioned, Naruto? As in, Uzumaki Naruto, Naruto? Jiraiya nodded and replied, yes. Tsunade turned her chocolate eyes to the only other blonde in the room and said, though I wonder, how do you know, Inoichi? Sume asked, why, which means? Tsunade responded on her behalf, saying, which means that Naruto is the only son of Minato, which means the council not only got rid of a loyal shinobi and the Yondaime's legacy, they also got rid of the Yondaime's flesh and blood. Tsunade turned on her teammate and questioned, Kaharu? But she was one of the ones behind the banishment of Naruto in the first place. Jiraiya responded on the man's behalf, saying, me and Kaharu released Naruto-kun's birth certificate, to let the council and Konoha know exactly who's behind the banishment. Sighing, Jiraiya raised his arms and said, and she hated not only them, but herself for it too. She's working undercover for me so we can get rid of that bastard Danzo before he tears Konoha asunder with his despotic plans. She's been having to side with the old bastard in the council chambers and in public so we can get the information to get him arrested and eventually executed for his crimes. Before asking, and why didn't you trust me to help you in this plans? Tsunade said, I see. I'm sorry, Tsunade, but there's no way Danzo would ever trust you, and it was dangerous enough with just Kaharu besides. You're too much like Sensei and your son, in your beliefs and attitude. Well, the attitude thing is closer to Naruto than Sensei, but still, the point stands. You trying to sidle up to Danzo would have resulted in him becoming suspicious, and then he'd become a clam and we'd never get the information we need, Jiraiya clarified. He asked, turning to face his friend and longtime crush, I hope you understand. Tsunade nodded and sighed, saying, of course I do. I've dealt with the man enough to know that I'm decades too young for the crippled warhawk to begin trusting. Jiraiya turned to face Sume and said, thank you, would you mind getting Naruto so I can begin the unsealing? He asked. Sume said, of course, with a solemn nod, and left the hotel room. The three of them were left to do nothing but sit and wait in the hopes that they could assist Naruto in overcoming this most recent revelation without totally ruining him. What? Unable to process what he had just been told, Naruto stared in disbelief. I cannot believe that you would even suggest those things to Ino-chan. Shu. You know better than to do that to a nice girl like her, Shu said, glaring at the stuffed fox toy as his blue eyes finally swap into his mind. He was sitting on the table in the ice cream parlor. With a smirk that turned into a frown, Ino said, see, I told you, Shu, she hissed. No, I will not tell him that. As she glared at the fox, her cheeks flushed. He asked, what is he talking about? And she was met with a pair of stunned blue eyes. After a few moments of silence, Ino growled, don't you dare. Hinata gasped, her face darkening as her hands covered her mouth, her pale lavender eyes turning to Ino as she asked, Ino, is that true? Ino's blush widened as she said, he's taken it out of proportion. I was dreaming about eating a sundae with Sakura and Naruto. Not that perverted nonsense he made it out to be. Don't you believe me, Naruto? Naruto? Ino and Hinata turned to face Naruto, whose eyes had taken on a distant, glassy expression as drool trickled from his nose and mixed with the blood that trickled from his upper lip and trickled down his chin from his open mouth. You can hear it? Shizune asked, turning to the Anbu, after Shishiguro said, I think the fox broke him. Shizune's eyebrows furrowed in perplexity as she questioned, but how? It's a toy. It can't talk. Shishiguro responded, of course. And I must say, if I were several years younger and unattached, I'd be in a similar state as Naruto. Seeing Shizune's stunned expression, Shishiguro responded, oh, but it can. You just have to know how to listen and, for lack of a better term, believe. He also helpfully added, also, insanity helps adults to believe the fox plushie is capable of speech. Insanity? Shizune asked, and the man smiled and replied, yeah, you see, most field shinobi suffer from some form of mental illness or another comes with the job. I'm afraid a person can take only so much stress before they snap, and our job is as stressful as they come. Hey, Iruka isn't insane. Naruto turned to Shishiguro, seemingly jolting him out of his perversion-fueled daze. Shishiguro nodded in agreement. That's true, Naruto. But he also isn't a field shinobi. He's a teacher outside of the Suna invasion. He probably hasn't seen near as much in the way of battle and death as those of us who leave the village walls regularly. Same goes for people like Sume-sama, Heishi-sama, and Inoichi-sama as clan heads. They don't get sent on missions too often due to their lofty positions being on the council. Thus being integral in the running of Konoha doesn't hurt either. The idea made Naruto shudder. Oh, so, you're saying me, Ino-chan, and Hinata-chan can go crazy? He said. He rubbed his chin and smiled as he stated, of course, you could already be crazy and just don't realize it yet. I mean, it's not like I'm saying you're going to start making suits out of people's skin and eating their flesh. You'll probably just pick up a quirk, something that'll help you deal with the stress that's put on us as shinobi. Probably perversion for you, Naruto, considering the Oroku no Jutsu, and if Chu is to be believed, Ino is already a pervert. Let's just hope she doesn't become as visible of one as Jiraiya or Chu, or else Inoichi-sama will have a massive coronary. When Ino squawked rather angrily and attempted to jump over the table, Hinata and a scowling Naruto had to stop her. This prevented her from trying to strangle the Anbu, who tipped his head back and roared with laughter. With a passionate nod, Naruto responded, yeah, Ino-chan isn't a pervert like Ero Sennin or Ero Chu, Teme. Shizune exclaimed, that's not funny, Shishiguro-san. Shishiguro smirked at the two and exclaimed, ah, poor little Naru-kun doesn't like me picking on his girlfriend. His laughter grew as he saw Hinata blush and appear a little dejected, Naruto flush with shame, and Ino flush with rage as she screamed, Naruto isn't my boyfriend. Could have fooled me. Shishiguro laughed, and Shizune gave him a sour look while slapping him on the forearm. Hinata was left in the unenviable position of preventing both Ino and Naruto from trying to murder the man. Sume walked into the parlor and approached the table, observing the diverse group of people who occupied it. Ah, I see you're still making friends wherever you go, Shishiguro-chan. Naruto asked, what brings you here, Sume-chan? Shishiguro turned to face the Inuzuka alpha female and raised his eyebrows, saying, Sume-chan? Haven't heard you let a man be that informal with you since Kiru died? Then she said, Naruto is special, so only he can get away with it. Sume scowled, gave his cheek a hard pinch, and started tugging roughly. After the woman let him go, Shishiguro smirked and rubbed his cheek, saying, ah, I think Sume-sama has a crush on Naruto-kun. However, his smile briefly faded when he saw the woman exchange glances with Hinata. Choosing to intervene before Shishiguro could engage the Inuzuka matriarch in combat, Shizune grinned at her and inquired, anyways, what brings you here, Sume-sama? Shizune turned to Hinata and said, why don't you go with them, Hinata-chan? Sume turned to Shizune and said, Tsunade-sama needs to talk with Naruto about something. At that point, Ino, Shizune, and Shishiguro realized what she probably wanted to talk about. Are you sure it's okay? Hinata asked. Don't worry about it, Hinata-chan. If Ka-san raises a stink over it, I'll stick up for you, Naruto said with a smile. Seeing the two get up, Ino got up and said, I'll go too. I need to talk to daddy about something anyways. Hinata blushed as she smiled softly and said, thank you, Naruto-kun. Naruto turned to the stuffed fox and grinned broadly, saying, come on Shu, you can go too. He then picked up the toy and carried it under his arm before turning to face Sume and grinning at the woman. Ready to go, Sume-chan, he said. Before leaving the parlor with the three teenagers and their stuffed toy companion, Sume said, all right. She was a little unsure about the enigmatic talking toy. Shishiguro sank back in his chair and covered his eyes as soon as they were outside the building, saying, I have a bad feeling about this. Shizune added, returning much more solemnly to her ice cream, already losing her appetite over how her beloved, obnoxious little brother would react to this latest revelation. You and me both, Shishiguro-san. Tsunade turned to Yugo after ensuring the unconscious Pinkette would be okay before saying, it's time to wake Kushina up, as it were. Seeing the expression on Yugo's face, Tsunade interrupted her by saying, none of us like it, but we need his blood to break the seals, and even Naruto would be suspicious if we just walked up and asked for some of his blood. Yugo asked, I see. So, how long until we tell Naruto? Tsunade sighed, her already depressed mood dampening as she replied, as soon as Sume returns with the brat. I know, I'm just worried what'll happen when he recognizes Kushina-sama as the waitress before Shishiguro-san took over. What can we possibly tell him? Yugo asked, and Tsunade responded. We tell them both that she'd been captured and brainwashed into not remembering anything about her previous life, leaving her alive but useless. I refuse to tell either that she'd been there to kill her own son. Her mind will be damaged enough as is. This might just destroy her psychologically. After Yugo nodded, they both turned to see Tsume leading Naruto, Hinata, and Ino down the hallway. As Ino spoke, the blonde Jinchuriki burst out laughing whatever it was. Hinata giggled into her hand and Tsume barked out a laugh. Tsunade asked, "Hey brats, what's so funny?" Naruto turned to face her and continued to smile widely, saying, "Ino-chan was telling us funny stories about Team 8 and their missions." "So Ka-san, what did you need to talk to me about?" Naruto asked, jogging up to the large-chested Sannin and placing his hands behind his head with a soft smile. With a sigh, Tsunade closed her eyes and put a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. The boy asked, "What's wrong, Ka-san?" as his arms fell to his sides and his smile turned to a frown. "Well, Naruto Sochi, it seems that we've found your biological mother," she said, opening her eyes and glancing at the younger blonde. With wide eyes, Naruto screamed, "What, are you serious?" The woman nodded and responded, "Yes, Naruto, I'm serious. We found her working here in a restaurant." With his head cocked to the side, Naruto sniffled under his breath as he said, "So the V villagers were right, she didn't want me." The boy's tone was so broken that the women wanted nothing more than to comfort him. Tsunade grabbed his shoulder and replied, "That's not true, Naruto Sochi. If she wanted me, then why is she here? Why didn't she stay and take care of me? Why did she leave me all alone?" exclaimed Naruto, raising his head and shedding tears. Tsunade gathered the blonde into an embrace and while saying, "It wasn't her decision to do so, Naruto Sochi. When we found her, she was brainwashed and had seals on her that locked away her mind and previous life. She doesn't remember you, your father, or even that she was a kunoichi. I'm certain that had that not happened, she never would have left you." With a sniffle, Naruto gazed at the woman embracing him, searching for any sign of dishonesty in her expression. Following a few tense moments, he questioned, Really? The boy blinked as he said, "Ero Sennin's here? And you let him near a helpless woman?" Tsume continued, "Of course, Naruto, that's why we had to get Jiraiya-sama, Inoichi-san, and Ino-chan to come and help her." With a sly smile, Tsunade said, "Don't worry Naruto Sochi, Inoichi is keeping an eye on him, and besides, I'd like to hope that the old pervert has some standards." Tsume burst out laughing. Tsunade put Naruto back on his feet after giving him a final squeeze and hug, saying, "Now, let's get some of your blood so we can break the seals on you." With a startled cry, Naruto shifted into a defensive position and exclaimed, "Why do you need my blood?" Naruto gulped, rubbing his arms together as his eyes darted around, and he said, "Oh okay. Just so long as that crazy blood-sucking proctor lady isn't around." Tsume had stated, "Apparently whoever sealed her used your father's blood to make the seals, and seeing as he's no longer with us, we need the blood of his only child. You, and it's not like we need all of it." Tsunade questioned, "Blood-sucking proctor lady?" Hinata replied, "Her name's Anko-san, and she proctored the second portion of the CH Chunin exams." As Tsunade complained about more thorough psyche evaluations when Jiraiya returned home, Yugo sighed and rubbed her forehead, saying, "Well, I guess that explains it." She then added, "Naruto, no one's going to suck your blood now, come on. We need to undo the seals so Inoichi can properly help her." As he walked forward, he missed 3 winces from the older females, which made Hinata and Ino suspicious. Naruto appeared to take that seriously and nod when he said, "Okay Ka-san, let's go and help her. Maybe I can learn about her and my dad too." However, neither girl had the courage to ask up, so they let them walk ahead of them and trailed behind the group. "Hey Hinata, what's with Naruto and Tsunade calling each other mom and son?" Ino whispered as she leaned in to the former heiress. In a quiet response, Hinata said, It seems when all this started, Tsunade-sama and Naruto-kun adopted one another as parent and child respectively." She smiled softly. "You know, that's actually sweet. 2 lost, damaged souls meeting and finding such a connection in a time of deep crisis." Hinata nodded in agreement, gazing at her blonde crush's back as he walked silently alongside Tsunade at the head of their group. Ino blinked, then smiled during her statement. "Hey Naruto, I guess you know why you're here already, huh?" Jiraiya smiled and sighed as he watched his godson enter the room so solemnly. The blonde, however, focused entirely on the beta, more precisely, the unconscious redhead lying on the beta, and ignored the white-haired Sennin. Is that her?" he asked, swallowing the lump in his throat after staring at her for a long time in an awkward silence. Jiraiya replied, waving the blonde over, "Yeah, this is Uzumaki Kushina, your until recently believed dead mother. Kamere brat, we need to get started on the unsealing, and we can't start the unsealing until I get some of your blood." Naruto nodded and approached, his gaze never leaving the redhead's face as he seemed to be simply sleeping on the bed in front of them. Jiraiya grabbed Naruto's wrist and raised his hand palm up when he was close enough. After that, he swiftly dragged a blade across the offered palm, causing Hinata and Ino to gasp a little and Naruto, who was still staring at Kushina with a lot of questions racing through his head, to flinch just a little. "Alright, brat. You can step back now, I need some space to work, and to be honest, you're cramping my style right there though not by much, you tiny brat," Jiraiya told Naruto as she collected some of the blood in a tiny clear inkwell. Jiraiya anticipated that the blonde would become furious and begin shouting threats, denials, and retorts while wildly flailing his fists in an attempt to attack him ineffectively. Everyone who knew the blonde, however, was more than a little uneasy when the blonde just backed off a few steps, as if ignoring the gap the Sennin had created for one of the blonde's notorious freak-outs. Pulling back the blanket, Jiraiya said, "Right?" Kushina was lying there wearing only a bra and plain white underwear. The blonde Jinchuriki responded to this. With a red flush covering his cheeks, Naruto screamed incredulously, "Hey Ero Sennin! What do you think you're doing?" And shielded his eyes with an arm. With a sigh of fake frustration, Jiraiya said, "Gaki, I need to be able to reach the seals. And unfortunately the only way to reach the seal is by leaving her in her underwear. Believe me, I'm not getting any enjoyment from this." Jiraiya was happy to receive something from the blonde. This time, Jiraiya responded with a sigh of genuine frustration, saying, "Naruto, I'm a super pervert, not a sexual assaulter. If I wanted a woman to enjoy my company, I wouldn't stoop to a comatose woman being subjugated by seals. I can get plenty of women to get naked just by walking into a room. Now be quiet and let me work, brat." Naruto sobbed, "Liar." As Jiraiya took out a small paintbrush and dipped it into the inkwell, Naruto attempted to glare at him through his arm. He leaned forward and started working, carefully using the blood to write a new seal over the old one on her stomach. After scraping off the excess, he ran through a series of hand seals, then drew out the counter seal on Kushina's stomach before placing his glowing hands there. Her back arched. A scream tore from her throat as the blood burned into her skin, and the sound of sizzling flesh and smoke started to drift off her stomach as they touched her. Tsume glanced between Kushina and Naruto as she heard her newly discovered friend scream in pain. The blonde with the whiskers was pale, his hands clenched so tightly that the force was turning his knuckles white as he listened to Kushina's cries of pain. She put a hand on his shoulder and his head turned so quickly that she winced, swearing she heard his neck pop. Tsume attempted to give him a comforting smile, which he grudgingly returned. "Don't worry Naruto, she'll be okay. He was just making fun of her for his own amusement." As the older shinobi saw that it didn't look him in the eyes, she glanced over his head to Hinata, who was observing them as he turned around. In the hopes that she understood, Tsume grinned at the girl before turning her gaze from her to Naruto. Luckily, the young Hyuga was quite perceptive and soon realized what was going on. She stepped forward and gave him a reassuring embrace. Her face flushed with shame. The boy appeared much calmer than before, but he tensed and then relaxed, his hands still clenched tightly. After what seemed like hours but was actually only a few minutes, Jiraiya leaned back and used the back of his arm to wipe the perspiration from his forehead before saying, "One down, 2 to go. Fortunately, that seems to be the main seal, used to reinforce the others, so with it gone, the others should be much quicker to remove." After noticing that he was finished, Tsunade moved forward to promptly treat the rather unpleasant burns that the unsealing had left on her stomach. As she worked, Jiraiya turned to his longtime teammate and asked, "After you're done, would you mind turning her over so I can remove those seals?" Tsunade, who had occasionally watched the blonde during the process, knew her friend was correct and carefully turned the unconscious redhead onto her stomach, exposing the 2 seals there. He leaned closer and whispered, so only she could hear, "I'd do it myself, but I'm afraid the brat would go ballistic if I did so." He picked up his brush and inkwell and started carefully writing the appropriate counter seals over both seals, adding more drawings to join them. "What are you doing?" Tsunade asked, raising an eyebrow as she observed him. "Well, since I doubt Naruto wants to listen to her scream any longer than necessary, I decided to remove both seals at once, not to mention, with the main seal on her stomach gone, they're much weaker, and so attacking both at once will allow me to use some of the resultant energy from breaking one to aid me in breaking the other," Jiraiya clarified. Tsunade said, "Then hurry up and do it." Jiraiya nodded as he completed his task. He put his palms on her back and flashed through another set of hand seals as he broke the 2 seals. Smoke rose from the burning flesh on her back, sending Kushina into another fit of screaming. Hinata buried her face in Naruto's shoulder and gave him a tighter hug as she screamed, and the blonde boy did the same, attempting to block out the noises coming from the room. The elder Yamanaka was reassuringly massaging Ino's back as she buried her face in her father's chest. In the back of the room, he could tolerate the terrible sounds of someone screaming in pain because he was an expert in torture and interrogation, but since his princess, his daughter, was not an expert in torture and interrogation, The noises were like thousands of senbons piercing her flesh all at once. Having gone through it himself in his early days as a T&I specialist, he understood the emotion and wished his daughter would not have to go through it, especially at such a young age. When Jiraiya finally took his hands off Kushina's back, he sat boneless in his seat with perspiration streaming down his brow. When Tsunade realized he was finished, he moved forward once more and started to treat the redhead's back burns. The Sannin caught his breath, grinned at his audience, and made the statement, "Well, the hard part's over." "What about the seal on her tongue?" Inoichi asked. Jiraiya laughed and replied, "Well, that is a rather simple, mass-produced seal, most likely used on every member of the group so they don't go blabbing about things the leader believes they shouldn't compared to the 3 I just broke. That'll be a quick, relatively painless procedure and one that can wait until later. It's more important we heal her mentally first." Tsunade looked at Inoichi after placing the healed woman back on her back and said, "Okay, Inoichi-san, do your thing." The tall blonde nodded, moved away from his daughter, and muttered, "Shintenshin no jutsu." While flashing through the traditional hand seals almost instantly, his body started to fall apart without any bones, and Tsunade's catch was the only thing keeping him from falling to the ground. Naruto asked the former Hokage, "What do we do now, Ka-san?" while seated in a nearby chair. Tsunade sighed and remarked, Now comes the hardest part, Sochi." Ino questioned, "What's harder than listening to her screaming, Tsunade-sama?" She replied, "Waiting to see if he's successful or not," without further explanation. Tsunade sighed as she observed Naruto pacing in circles, pausing occasionally to glance anxiously at Kushina's prone form before continuing his pacing. She was aware that this was the most calm Naruto would experience until everything was settled. He was actually more composed than she had anticipated during this. She turned her attention from the pacing Naruto to the other people in the room. Sitting beside her father, Ino kept an eye out for any indications of trouble in his unconscious state. Tsume and Hinata were on the opposite side of the room, observing Naruto with concern while Hinata caressed the plush fox, which was presumably named Shu, beside her. Jiraiya had sat with her head leaned back and her eyes closed, seemingly dozing off. She was aware, however, that he was not. He was just resting his eyes and was completely awake. She was aware that Yugo was updating Shizune and Shishiguro outside the door because she felt that telling Naruto everything in the room would unnecessarily agitate him even more. "How long is this going to take?" Naruto exclaimed to no one, his blue eyes brimming with agitation, uncertainty, and sheer frustration. As she could already see the outburst in the blonde's eyes, Tsunade responded, "We don't know, Naruto. We have no idea just how much damage has been done to her mentally, or what he's got to do to go about repairing the damage done by her experiences. All we can do is wait." "But there's got to be something we can do. I mean, how can we just sit here while Naruto started, and Tsunade finished. "While your mother is laying there, her fate completely out of your hands, forcing you to trust someone else to complete a mission you want to do yourself so bad you can taste it?" "Yeah!" Naruto screamed, and Tsunade. "Unfortunately, Naruto, that's largely what any leader, cage or not, must do. You want to do everything. Fight all the battles and do all the missions, make sure no one you care for is ever put in danger, bearing the weight of the world on your shoulders. But you can't do that, Naruto. You've got to learn to trust those around you, and believe in their strength like they believe in yours." Naruto began to say, but was cut off when he was pulled into a lap and had 2 arms wrapped around his chest. His back was pressed against a soft chest. Tsume tried to soothe the agitated blonde by gently running her fingers through her blonde spikes and saying, "Naruto, there's no point in arguing. No matter how much you may want to, you aren't a Yamanaka, so you can't enter her mind." Hinata rubbed his arm and whispered, "Tsume-sama's right. Naruto-kun Inoichi-sama is a Junin, so he knows what he's doing." This helped Tsume soothe the agitated Naruto. As he opened his eyes to see his godson from next to Tsunade, Jiraiya muttered, "Lucky little bastard, I have to pay to get women to do that for me." Tsunade got up from her chair and said, "Well, he's not a noisy, lecherous old pervert. He's a noisy, friendly young piece of Shotokan." Jiraiya saw the blonde move a little and did the same, listening to Tsunade explain that they both needed a little walk. After repeating the explanation to Shizune, Yugo, and Shishiguro, the 2 fabled ninja left the room. After a few seconds of silence, Jiraiya laughed and said, "He gets the whole being a Shotokan from his dad. I remember when he got his Hite 8, he was having to fight off the girls young and old. He complained constantly about how the Hite 8 equals adulthood. Law resulted in him never getting any peace from the women wanting to be with him. At least, not until he hooked up with Kushina. She and her favorite katana pretty much ensured that all women kept off of her property," Tsunade replied, and Jiraiya's And she meant it too. She even got him a tattoo of the words, property of Kushina, on his butt. Poor Minato never quite got over that, at least, not until Kushina got a property of Minato tattoo on her own butt. And how would you know that? Tsunade asked, and Jiraiya responded, Minato told me. He was so proud of his beloved redhead and she bitch slapped him hard on the back of the head for telling me. Tsunade nodded in agreement with the explanation and paused for a moment to reflect before asking, so the only question left is, when they find out everything, who's going to be angrier, Naruto or Kushina? With a resigned sigh, Jiraiya stated, I'm not looking forward to getting that answer, cause both are going to be enraged with me. Tsunade shook her head, adding, well, to be honest, you could have fought Sensei harder than you did. I know, but after everything that happened, I couldn't stand being in Konoha, and I trusted Sensei to take care of Naruto better than me. Jiraiya murmured. Receiving a sigh stated, you've learned what I did all those years ago, and in spite of it all, that brat convinced me to return to Konoha and take the damnable job myself. I know, I was there, and to be perfectly honest, I doubt that Naruto or Kushina could possibly hate me more than I hate myself after I learned exactly what happened to Naruto over the years while I was gone. Jiraiya responded. Tsunade patted her teammate's big shoulder as she left the hotel and walked out onto the street, saying, well, maybe you can take this opportunity to begin making up for your past mistakes. According to Jiraiya, who was stretching his back and listening to it pop, way ahead of you, Tsunade-heim. He went on, I just hope that he'll be willing to forgive me. He will. Jiraiya, you know as well as me that boy has the infinite capability to forgive. Sensei knew that, and that's why he allowed as much as he did. Tsunade replied with a dark chuckle. I just wish I could say the same, then maybe I wouldn't have spent so many years lost in sake, debts, and depression, forcing Shizune to babysit me and keep me from finally killing myself. As he walked alongside his former teammate, Jiraiya remarked, well, you know what they say, Tsunade-heim. Hindsight makes a bitch of us all. Unfortunately, I know that all too well. He patted her shoulder and said, don't worry, Tsunade-heim, when Naruto's involved, everything somehow turns out just fine now. How about you and me get a couple of drinks while Inoichi works? Tsunade muttered, yeah, I just hope everything turns out alright in the end. Jiraiya smiled. Tsunade grinned and replied, sounds like an excellent idea after the past few days I've had. I could use some sake, and remember, you're buying. Jiraiya replied, of course. Tsunade-heim. Watching Naruto lie boneless against Sume, eyes glazed over and almost indecently relaxed, Shishiguro sighed. He took a small bag of candy balls out of his pocket. He pulled one out and aimed it carefully, causing the tiny piece of candy to bounce off the blonde's forehead. The blonde blinked and shook his head in anger. A glare and a few chosen words already forming to be directed at the Anbu. Sume worked swiftly, running her hand through his hair until he was once again practically unconscious. Sume growled, and Shishiguro raised his hands in a conciliatory manner, saying, sorry, I just wanted to make sure he wasn't dead. We worked hard to get him like this, and if you get him started again, I'm going to kill you. Shishiguro shrugged and responded, yeah, but they aren't nearly as fun as throwing things at him. Shizune replied, there are better ways to do that. The man responded, yeah, but there are worse ways for the stress-induced insanity all-field shinobi get to manifest itself than immaturity like genocidal insanity, or gaining a god complex or something. Yugo sighed as she added, you are so immature sometimes, Shishiguro. True, but at least they're not as annoying as immaturity. Yugo responded, and Shishiguro responded, I agree, but which is better, being annoyed or being violently slaughtered by someone you considered a comrade? Sume raised an eyebrow and said, how often do you two have this conversation? Yugo answered, being annoyed, I guess. Sume sighed as she rubbed her forehead and muttered, dear God, I hope that Kiba doesn't end up like Shishiguro. Yugo said bluntly, far too often for comfort. He exclaimed, hey, I'm not that bad. But before the Inuzuka matriarch could respond with a suitably sardonic retort, there was a scream that made everyone turn to face the stiff figure of Inoichi, who was already screaming again and had his terrified daughter trying to calm him. What's happening? Shizune inquired, and Ino responded, I don't know. Something must be going on inside of Kushina-san's mind, some form of mental defense or an unknown seal. Sume asked, well, what do we do? To which Ino replied, we either look for a seal that was overlooked earlier, or I enter her head and help my dad. The next question was, can't we do both? Ino nodded and responded, yes, but I'm not sure I can be of any aid to him. Ino scowled but nodded in response to Yugo's question, but can't you bring someone with you into her mind? I can, but it'll be difficult and dangerous. I'm just not as strong as dad is. I trust you, Ino-chan. Everyone's attention was drawn to the blonde with the blue eyes who had somehow escaped Sume's hold during the event and moved to stand next to Ino, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Naruto grinned and nodded in response to Ino's question, Really? Of course I do. When Ino asked, Oh okay, I'll try but who'll go? Naruto replied, Me. Don't be stupid, Naruto-kun. If we let you do this, Tsunade Sancho would kill us. Shizune was arguing, but the blonde replied, Ino-chan's dad and my biological mom are in danger, and I can finally help do something, I'm going. Naruto glared back at Sume, who growled, No you are not, Naruto. Yes I am. I may have been helpless to do anything earlier, but now I have a chance to help her and I will, Sume said. Hinata whispered, Na Naruto-kun. The blonde turned to face her, and she gasped and her cheeks darkened when she saw the resolve shining in his eyes, the same resolve that had initially drawn her in. The unbreakable will that would not be broken under any circumstances. When Naruto said, Hinata-chan, she blinked and, at last remembering to breathe, looked down at her jousting fingers before continuing, I think that Na Naruto-kun should go. Sume turned to try to reason with the girl, but she stopped when she saw the look of complete trust and belief in her eyes, and she turned to Naruto. Hinata-san, have you gone mental? Shishiguro asked, and the girl shook her head, responding, No, I just believe Na Naruto-kun will succeed. Similar to the previous heiress, she also gasped when she saw the blonde, who at the time appeared to be so familiar to his father that it was unreal. Like Hinata, she also found herself believing in the blonde, just as she had done with his father on October 10, 13 years prior. Shishiguro and Yugo stared at Sume in shock when she finally said, I agree with Hinata. Yugo was the first to speak, growling, I don't believe it, it's actually spreading. With a sense of finality, Naruto exclaimed, Then it's settled, I'm going. Shizune screamed, It's most certainly not settled. Ino interrupted, saying, Please, whoever's going, we need to help my dad. Everyone turned to face the man, who appeared composed at the time but had sweat practically dripping down his face and blind eyes that looked like those of a scared and injured animal. Naruto exclaimed, Come on Ino-chan. And the platinum blonde nodded before forming the required hand seals and exclaiming, Kanbi Shintenshin no Jutsu. Both Naruto and Ino became boneless unconscious in a split second, with Naruto avoiding a heap on the floor by being caught by Sume and Ino sagging in her chair. Shishiguro turned to face the Inuzuka matriarch and remarked, You know Sume-sama, if this goes horribly wrong, I'm blaming you for this to Tsunade-sama. Sume growled, about to respond, but Yugo interrupted him by raising a hand and saying, I second that idea. She turned to Shizune for support as she blinked, but Shizune gave her a sheepish smile and said, I'm sorry, Sume-sama, but you did encourage him. She simply sat in silence for a few long moments, realizing the potential repercussions of endorsing Naruto's choice with Tsunade in the event that something went wrong. Before collapsing into her chair while holding the unconscious blonde, she groaned and closed her eyes after considering the possibilities, each more terrible than the last, and muttered, Well fuck. Unaccustomed to the Shintenshin Jutsu, Naruto sat on the ground. In Kushina's mind, his head swimming, the elder woman's mindscape looked almost exactly like a training ground inside the walls of Konoha, and Ino, who had experienced the sensation from her own training, blinked in surprise. The sole distinction was that there were only 4 faces on the Hokage monument that stood watch atop the mountain and featured the initial construction of Tsunade's head. Nay, Ino-chan, how did we get back to Konoha? Naruto asked, looking at Ino after his head had finally cleared and he had blinked and evaluated his surroundings. She replied, glancing at her fellow blonde, We're not in Konoha, we're in Kushina-san's mindscape, it just so happens to look like Konoha. Oh, Naruto nodded and awkwardly stood up when Ino said, Come on Naruto, we need to look for daddy and your mom and see what we can do to help. Taking a few moments to regain his balance, the two headed for the village, which was probably where Kushina and Inoichi were. The people in the mindscape Konoha waved, smiled, and wished Naruto a good morning, leaving him speechless as he walked through the streets. Naruto could only nod foolishly and wave feebly to the people lining the streets, and no one even gave him the slightest nasty glance when they assumed he wasn't paying attention. Old man Tucci called out, Hey kid, why not come and have some ramen with your girlfriend there? A younger, slimmer version of the ramen chef stood outside the store with his hat perched atop a full head of hair. Naruto turned, expecting to see the same cozy little shack, but was startled to see a wealthy, 2-story building in place of the stand. Tucci Gigi. As Naruto gaped at how drastically different the man looked from reality, he thought additionally, his restaurant was much larger and, judging by the noise coming from the open door, much more well-liked. While this was going on, Ino smiled and retorted, Not now, I'm afraid we have business to take care of. Ino also denied that Naruto was her girlfriend. Naruto blinked when he questioned, the Hokage eats here? Tsuchi responded, oh well, maybe later if you get lucky, you'll be able to see the Hokage and his family eating here. Oh yeah, Minato-sama and his family eat here all the time. I swear if it was possible, Kushina-sama and Naruto-san would eat nothing but ramen breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Tsuchi laughed. Oh well, I'll be seeing you kids around, I've got work to do inside I'm afraid, he said, turning and waving a hand. With a nod, Ino turned to her partner to encourage him to continue, but she was stopped by the expression on the blonde's face. His eyes were wide and his pupils were dilated, and he appeared to be on the verge of hyperventilating based on his rapid breathing. He was also much paler than usual. Naruto, you okay? Ino waved a hand in front of the blonde's face, but he was unresponsive, still gazing straight ahead at where Tsuchi had stood, a tremor coursing through his body as he started to perspire. Ino cried out, Naruto? Naruto. As a hand on his shoulder made him turn to face her, his response was a single word, barely audible above a whisper. The Yondaime I is my father, the Yondaime is my father. Naruto, are you okay? Ino asked, gazing into her companion's unwavering blue eyes as he stared at the two-story ramen restaurant while muttering something unintelligibly. Ino repeated, Naruto? Can you hear me? But got no response. She scowled, took hold of his shoulder, and gave him a gentle shake, but the blonde made no move. She shook him a little harder and said, Naruto? Hello, Naruto, are you there? But she didn't get a response. She scowled deeply before bringing her hand back and giving him a painful slap across the cheek in response. Naruto gave a startled yelp and instinctively reached up to grab his cheek, which now bore a large red handprint. He rubbed his stinging cheek, glared at his aggressor, and screamed, what was that for? Naruto sighed as he turned away and muttered, oh sorry about yelling at you, Ino-chan. Ino responded, you had become incoherent, your eyes having gotten the 1,000-yard stare. I had to do something to snap you out of it. Naruto grinned and said, thanks, but my father is the Yondaime Hokage. I can't believe it. Ino had said, don't worry about it. Ino casually said, I couldn't either when I'd first learned about it myself. Naruto asked, why you knew? As he looked at her in disbelief and betrayal. Ino quickly responded, not liking her friend's expression, well, not always, only after Jiraiya-sama released the information to the public of Konoha. Naruto blinked and remarked, oh so, everyone knew but me? Naruto nodded and said, oh, okay, well, let's go help your dad now, I'll worry about the Yondaime later. Ino responded, well, forehead, Hinata, and Sume-sama didn't know. This time, Ino blinked first, then blurted out a grateful smile before sniffling and saying, thanks, Naruto. Naruto turned and inhaled deeply before making his way toward the Hokage Tower in the hopes of running into Kushina and Inoichi. No problem, he said. You let him do what? Jiraiya stood close by, looking upset but not nearly as destructively angry as the slug Sanin, and Sume winced, attempting to use the unconscious Naruto as a shield from the rather lethal glare Tsunade was giving her. Despite being a Junin and being bold and a little conceited, she was neither suicidal nor stupid enough to face Tsunade's wrath without a weapon that could have destroyed the Hokage Tower in a single blow, let alone agitate the woman when she was already feeling suicidal. And she wouldn't be looking to her betraying associates for assistance, as they had all abandoned her as soon as Tsunade walked in, everyone except Shizune, who was flinching pointlessly in the room's far corner while keeping a wary eye on her mentor. She was clearly only going to assist in healing the poor soul that Tsunade was going to maul, and only after her anger had subsided. And they all agreed that Tsunade was probably going to beat someone up before she calmed down. I can explain, Tsunade-sama. Sume started out but was interrupted when Tsunade grew loudly. I don't want to hear it, Sume. You allowed Naruto and Ino to run headlong into a situation they're nowhere near prepared for and that even a master Yamanaka such as Inoichi couldn't handle. That was reckless, not to mention dangerous. Of all the stupid, insane things I've ever heard. Jiraiya put a hand on his teammate's shoulder and remarked, Tsunade-hime, it won't do any good to kill Sume, at least until we can fully hear her side of the story anyway. She replied, of course, Jiraiya, she obviously has a good excuse for letting Naruto run headlong into such a situation without trying to stop him. Tsunade took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Gazing at the two formidable shinobi in front of her, Sume swallowed and prepared herself to say, well, you see, it's like this. As Shishiguro, and Hinata sat in hiding in the hotel room with Haruno Sakura's sleeping forma who was now drooling on her pillow at Yugo's side while Hinata alternated between sitting on the bed and pressing her fingers together and pacing the floor. Yugo and Shishiguro were seated in chairs at the small table. Shishiguro shrugged and said, "I do too, but what choice did we have, Yugo?" Yugo looked at Shishiguro and said, "You know, Shishiguro, I feel bad about leaving Tsume all alone against an angry Tsunade and an assured to get angry Jiraiya. We could have stood beside her as loyal comrades, you know, like the saying goes, those who disobey orders are trash, but those who abandon comrades are below trash, and we did kind of just abandon a comrade back there," Yugo responded, and Shishiguro nodded as, "True, but I believe this could be an exception." "How so?" Yugo inquired, and Shishiguro responded, "Because a shinobi who foolishly throws away his life is a poor shinobi indeed in trying to defend Tsume's actions from an irate former Hokage and a soon-to-be irate current Hokage. Not to mention 2/3 of the Densetsu no Sanin is foolishly throwing away your life. No way to look about it." "Yeah, but still, Shishiguro, maybe we should have tried to bring Tsume with us," Yugo replied, to which Shishiguro replied, "And have a Tsunade who's growing increasingly angrier chasing us across this village. Do you know the danger that had put the innocent civilians in? Not to mention the property damage?" When Yugo said, "I didn't think of that," her face went very pale as her imagination took over. "I know it seems cruel what we did to Tsume, but unfortunately it was the best we could do in the situation. Besides, I'm sure Tsunade won't hurt her too severely." Ino would occasionally glance at her companion as they were walking, the blonde gazing around as though in awe of everything that was happening around them without noticing anything unusual. Ino scowled. She would have sworn she was back home if she hadn't known any different. Ino put her hand on Naruto's shoulder and said, "Naruto, what's wrong?" Naruto's head turned to her so fast that she winced after hearing the pops his movement produced, but as soon as he realized it was her, he relaxed and sighed. Ino completed Naruto's statement, "Nothing, it's just that you're not used to not getting glares as you walk the streets." How, Naruto gaped, and Ino grinned back, saying, "Just because I seem like a worthless idiot doesn't mean I am. Baka, now come on. We need to hurry and find Daddy as quickly as we can and help fix Kushina-san." Naruto nodded numbly, and the two walked silently toward the tower. Pain sat with his hands folded in his lap and his eyes closed, listening to the quiet of his surroundings. In the shadows of Akatsuki's hiding place he allowed himself to pretend that the world was at peace and that his divine wrath was necessary because he found this infrequent period of quiet and stillness to be peaceful, that Yahiko had not been killed by the pain and hatred of this world, and that he, Konan, and Yahiko were once more together. However, the sound of someone clearing their throat cut through his thoughts, causing his ringing eyes to open and turn to face the person disturbing him. Pain turned to face the intruder and saw that it was Uchiha Madara, the real leader of Akatsuki, wearing a mask with an orange spiral design. "What do you need, Madara-sama?" the orange-haired man said, bowing his head. With a hint of pain hidden behind his mask, Madara said, "Why, Pain, what makes you think I need something? Can't I just come and say hello?" Pain responded by giving the man a blank stare while raising a pierced eyebrow in a questioning manner. Pain nodded and said, "Whom am I to dispose of, Madara-sama?" Madara replied, "Right, anyways. I need of you and Konan to dispose of someone for me?" Madara casually replied, "Oh, no one important, just your former sensei Jiraiya of the Densetsu no Sanin." The masked man was disappointed by the silence that hung over him because he had hoped for some sort of reaction or outburst from the man he was speaking to. Behind his mask, Madara grinned and said, "Thank you, Pain, and do try to make it seem as if you had committed the crime." Pain replied, "Very well, Madara-sama." "Of course, but may I ask why, Madara-sama?" Pain asked, and Madara responded, "Because if we can get Iwa and Konoha into another war, they'll be much less likely to have the ability to focus on their foolishly free-ranged Jinchuriki and his little team. Then we can swoop in, capture him, and extract the Kyuubi with none being the wiser, understand?" Clearly, Ino scowled as they walked together, the silence around them growing more awkward by the moment, as if it were trying to crush them both. She had made an effort to ignore it by focusing on those around her, but she was starting to feel the effects of her companion's absence of their typical contagious joy. After a few long minutes, she finally lost it and asked, "So, Tsunade-sama's decided you're heirs on, and you've decided she's your mother, huh?" to break the awkward silence. Naruto nodded, grinned, and remarked, "Yeah, but she can be really embarrassing sometimes." Ino nodded and responded, "I know, right? Daddy says it's a parent's prerogative to do so in regards to their children. He also said it was a source of amusement for parents to embarrass their children. I think he just likes pestering me for no reason." Naruto took a breath and said, Ka-san says the same thing. Then she started pinching my cheeks and telling me how cute I am when I get all pouty. When they finally came to a halt in front of the tall red tower that housed the Hokage's office, Naruto glared at Ino after she giggled. Ready to go, Ino? Naruto asked, gulping and grinning nervously at Ino. Taking deep breaths, the two of them pushed open the door and entered the tower's reception floor, where they noticed that while the area appeared familiar, it was also slightly different, with a rather large seal placed in the middle of the floor. About as ready as you are, Naruto. The two approached the receptionist's desk after acclimating to their new environment, and she grinned and said, Hey kids, how may I help you today? He smiled back, and Naruto rubbed the back of his head before asking, Yeah, do you know where Kashina is? He laughed nervously. The receptionist raised an eyebrow and said, Kashina? He means Kashina. He gets his words scrambled when he gets nervous, Ino said with a smile. She inquired, Do you mean Namikaze Kashina? To which Naruto nodded and said, Yeah, her. The woman's next question was, What business do you have with Hokage-sama's wife? She began suspiciously at the teenagers in front of her, raising a delicate eyebrow. Ino gulped as she responded, We have something important to discuss with her. She could feel her anxiety rising. With her back to the two, the woman turned in her chair and pressed a button on the underside of her desk, saying, Oh, I see. A few Anbu quickly gathered around the desk, all with their weapons ready and watching the two with suspicion. Shit, Naruto and Ino muttered as they surveyed the masked shinobi encircling them, suppressing the urge to pull out a kunai for self-defense. However, a flash of yellow light appeared in the middle of the room on top of the large seal in the middle of the floor, diverting their attention from the Anbu heads snapped to the source, and they both stared at the new figure in the room in stunned silence. He had a rather slender face framed by long, spiky blonde hair, and a pair of familiar blue eyes scanned them warily. Like a predator examining its prey, he was tall, wearing the standard Junin uniform, which included a white trenchcoat trimmed in red flames. He gazed at the three-pronged kunai in his right hand for a few moments, the left clenched in a fist. As they stared at the man in wonder and, in Naruto's case, a mix of betrayal and agonized longing, they muttered, The Yondaime. After finishing his examination, Minato asked, What's going on here? To one of the nearby Anbu. When the Anbu nodded, the man nodded back and then turned back to face the two. It seems we have two more suspicious individuals looking for you, wife, Hokage-sama. With both of their eyes fixed on Naruto, Minato said, I see. Minato shook his head and cleared the cobwebs before responding, Bring them up to my office. Let me try talking to them, see what exactly is going on and what they want with my wife. The Anbu asked, What do we do with them, Hokage-sama? Naruto could only swallow as the Anbu led him and Ino up toward the office he had visited hundreds of times when Gigi was Hokage, wondering what else might occur. Sitting with Ino in an office he had visited numerous times over the years, Naruto resisted the urge to fidget, but across the desk, it was the scowling, commanding figure of the fabled Yondaime Hokage, a man he had recently learned was his father, rather than the recognizable, reassuring figure of the grandfatherly Sandaime Hokage grinning back at him. Minato looked from Naruto to Ino and back again before asking, Now, why exactly do you want to see my wife? With a rather apprehensive smile and, in Naruto's opinion, a rather obvious suspicious look, Ino answered, We just wanted to talk to her, that's all. In response to his next question, Okay, and what was it you needed to talk to her about? Ino said, Just have something important to tell her, nothing more. Minato asked, And what is this important information you have for her? Ino murmured, You wouldn't believe us if we told you, after swallowing. Naruto grunted in frustration as he responded, Her life in this world is fake. You're fake. This world's, Naruto, is fake. Tuchi's fake. Everything's fake. Minato had said, Try me. Minato stared at the blonde for a few long seconds before he said, Everything's fake, is it? Ino exclaimed, Naruto. Minato was leaning against the desk when Naruto yelled, Yes, everything is fake, I see. Taking up the phone, Minato sighed and said, Hello, this is Minato. I need you to come and help a couple of kids who are having a bit of trouble. Yes, they're in my office. No, they're not dangerous. Ino turned pale at that point, whispering, Naruto, I think he's calling someone to take us away, as she turned to face Naruto. After asking, What? Naruto turned to Minato and jumped over the desk toward the phone, trying to pry it from his grasp, but the man just swung a hand and gave the blonde a backhand, which sent him rolling across the floor and then skidding to a halt. Are you insane, kid? I could easily have you executed for a stunt like that. Are you really looking to die? The blonde man glared at Naruto as he stood up, clutching his sore cheek as he glared at Minato and prepared another attack. With a sneer, Naruto muttered, peeved, "Yeah right. You can't kill me because nothing here is real. It's all a figment of Ka-san's imagination." Minato questioned, "And who is this Ka-san? Whose imagination I'm a figment of?" Naruto replied, "Uzumaki Kushina." Naruto nodded in response to Minato's question, "So, you're the son of my wife, and I'm apparently a figment of her imagination, correct?" "Yeah. That's why we need to convince her this isn't real and have her wake up." With a nod of his own, Minato said, "Okay." But Naruto soon realized it wasn't for him. His body froze in place as he turned and felt a hand touch the back of his neck. Ino began to get up, but she also froze, sagging back in her chair while her eyes darted around the room. Looking at the two men in long white robes, Minato sighed and said, "Gentlemen, please take them to the psych ward of the hospital. They're obviously ill and require help. See to it that they get it." Minato sighed and rubbed his forehead, murmuring, "First a man disguised as Inoichi tries to assault my wife, and now this." Naruto fought to get his body to move as he felt himself lifted and slung over a shoulder, and Ino experienced the same thing behind him. "Daddy?" As the white-robed men dragged her and Naruto away, Ino pondered. "Let me go, damn it." Naruto screamed as he kicked his legs against the cushioned floor beneath him and twisted and turned in an attempt to escape the straitjacket they had imposed on him. One of the ward's guards called through the tiny viewing window, "Quiet down." Naruto paused and glared in response, saying, "Then let me go, I'm not crazy." The guard muttered, yeah, and closed the viewing window. Naruto continued to yell while he heard the man's muffled footsteps gradually disappear after they had completely vanished. He lay on the ground and closed his eyes, fighting the urge to cry as tears started to fall down his cheeks. Now was not the moment to cry. He sniffed, shook his head, and stumbled to his feet, twisting and turning again in the hopes of escaping the fucking straitjacket. Ino sat hunched over in her own cushioned cell, pounding the back of her head against the wall behind her as she sobbed softly. Her dad was probably being tortured, and the sheer power and duration of the fantasy prevented them from escaping until Kushina released them. The only way they could escape was if Kushina realized this was a dream and not the real world. But with all three of them captured, what were they going to do? With a sigh, Minato leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead and closing his eyes to try to prevent the headache from coming on full force. But as soon as he heard his office door open, he opened his eyes and turned to face it, ending his attempt to block his headache. However, he saw who it was before he could inform them that he was not currently accepting guests. A blonde-haired, blue-eyed teenager with Minato-like facial features, wearing a black t-shirt underneath a chunin vest and black slacks, was following a woman with long red hair and violet eyes who was wearing a loose-fitting dress and an apron. With a tired smile, Minato said, "Hey Kushina-chan, Naruto-kun, what are you doing here?" Kushina approached him, placing her chin on top of his head and draping her arms over his shoulders. "We heard what happened to you today and wanted to make sure you were okay," she said. Minato breathed a sigh of relief and patted, "Kushina-chan, I'm okay. It was just a couple of highly unstable genin who seemed to think everything was a figment of your imagination, and the boy was your son. The boy even tried to attack me when I was calling the medic nin to come see to them." Kushina sighed and remarked, "Poor kids, they just couldn't handle the life of a shinobi. At least now they can get the help they so desperately deserve." Naruto responded, "Sounds stark raving mad to me." "So Naruto-kun, how was your day?" Minato asked, turning to face the younger blonde. Kushina grinned and remarked, "You and Sasuke have practically been joined at the hip since you were babies." Naruto said, "Me and Sasuke just hung out, trained a little with Kakashi-sensei, you know the usual." "Hey Kushina-chan, what are you making for dinner tonight?" Minato asked with a sudden smile. Kushina said, "Oh, I think I'm just gonna surprise you." Minato pretended to pout and added, "But Kushina." Kushina responded, "That doesn't work on me, Minato, and you know it." Minato sighed, put his head in his hand, and smiled as he turned to face Naruto. "So Naruto, how has your work on the Hiraishin been going lately?" Minato asked. "Hard," Naruto grinned and said, "Yeah, but I'm gonna improve it." Minato said, "I know, but think about it this way. You're only learning it, I had to create it." Minato reached across the desk and ruffled the blonde hair much like his own, saying, "I don't doubt it. You are my son after all. Now, let's head home so Kushina-chan can get to cooking us another delicious dinner." As Kushina laughed, she remarked, "I think he loves my cooking more than you do, Minato-kun." Naruto exclaimed, "Yada." After getting up from his chair and stretching, Minato said, "I doubt that." He then put an arm around Kushina's waist and said, "Come on, let's go." Naruto sat up, stretched his arms over his head, and yawned, Blinking his bleary eyes, he mumbled, "Huh, when did I go to sleep?" while absently scratching his stomach and smacking his lips a little while surveying the room in which he was now living. After a few moments, he realized he was no longer wearing the straitjacket that was lying close by when his eyes widened and he looked down at himself. A single, three-pronged kunai was found lying close to him after more research. Naruto picked it up and carefully examined it, trying to recall the precise location where he had previously seen this particular style of kunai. He was certain that he had seen it somewhere, but he was unable to recall the location. Before putting the three-pronged kunai in his back pocket, he shrugged and stood up after a few moments, stretching out his body and moaning as joints the jacket had restricted popped from abrupt use. Naruto looked around him before focusing on the door, which seemed to be the only way out of the room. "Now, how'd I get out of this room?" he asked out loud with a shrug. Naruto approached it and cautiously tested it, pressing just enough to confirm that it was indeed open. He forced it open enough to peek out into the hallway, but had to force himself not to cry out in delight at his discovery. There were no people in one direction, and the door opening did not cause any noise. "Where the heck are they keeping Ino-chan?" he muttered as he crossed his arms and cautiously slipped out the door, closing it behind him. He waited for a few seconds before realizing that his luck had run out and that he would not be received with the answer. Naruto sighed and pouted, sighing slightly and muttering, "Damn it." He straightened up quickly, braced himself, and said, "Well, looks like I'm gonna have to find Ino myself," nodding to no one in particular. He then quietly snickered and said, "Hee, finding a pretty girl trapped in a strange place surrounded by enemies without help and limited supplies. This is like one of those awesome ninja stories Gigi used to tell me. Don't worry, Ino-chan. This particular story starring Uzumaki Naruto is going to have a happy ending. Dadbayo," he thought as he started to move silently down the hallway.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.